The Cozy Comfort Motel sits on a lonely highway in Louisiana. The two-story 50-room building was once a bright, friendly red, a welcome sight for tired travelers. But sometimes the motel isn't so safe and cozy. Sometimes it chooses to be something else. Following the rules is our only hope of avoiding such incidents. It's not much. Only the most desperate stay the night. They mostly come in the summer. Our usual guests are RD. Trippers who forgot to book a stay at a nicer hotel, or people who overestimated how long they'd be able to stay awake. Nothing glamorous, but at least they had a place to sleep. I have worked at the Cozy Comfort for about 2 years as an apprentice handyman, as a high school graduate with no interest in college. Seemed like a good gig at the time. I pick up a bunch of different skills, earn a living wage, and the best part? Complimentary housing. The handyman gets to live on site in case of emergencies, and as a handyman in training, I'd be bunking in a room next to his. These were separate from the 50 guest rooms. They sat near the supply closets and the main lobby. So on the first day, the handyman, Wayne, gave me a set of rules. He was a quiet, older guy, but he had a wicked sense of humor once you got to know him. However, he gave me the printed list with the gravity of a priest at a funeral. "Well, I'll explain while I show you the ropes," he told me. I thought he was joking at first, so I laughed and he cut me off. "Now, Jack, you need to take this seriously. This can be a dangerous job," he said. "Yeah, I already know how not to screw around on a ladder." I answered back, "It's not like that," Wayne said, and I stared at him, slightly confused, and we started making our way through the rules. Rule 1, remain polite to all guests. Wayne explained to me that the front desk had a phone line that guests can dial from their rooms. They can call in any issues that would require a handyman's help, such as a shower with weak water pressure or a broken mini fridge. The concierge would find us, and we would have to go help out. Some of the guests could be quite rude, apparently. Wayne had been here for almost 3 decades, and some of the stories there were real doozies. Apparently, one time a guy staying on his own had called the front desk 10 times within the span of 1 hour. Kept insisting that something was wrong with his mirror. So Wayne shows up to the room, expecting the mirror to be broken, but it was totally fine. The guy got mad, insisting it had to be broken. He said he saw another person in there, and that wasn't how mirrors worked. Nobody else was in the room. Wayne didn't see anything, obviously, and as he tried to leave, the guest attacked him, broke his nose, and told him he couldn't leave. Security ended up throwing the guy out. You still had to be polite, though, no matter what a guest might throw at you. A place to relax was one of the only things the Cozy Comfort had to offer, and you never knew what someone might be going through. It's important to stay polite and calm at all times. Rule number 2. Do not leave a mess after a job is done. Now this seems pretty obvious, but Wayne told me that I had to make sure I call one of our maids in after doing a repair in an area a guest might see, and I still had to do it even if I cleaned up my supplies or anything that might get spilled on my own. Now this seemed a bit of overkill to me, but he insisted every rule was there for a reason. Rule number 3. Remove the box from the ice machine every night at 3 a.m. Place it in the staff kitchen and return to your room. Failure to do so will result in immediate termination. There were also a few rules regarding tasks that needed to be completed every day. This was one of them. We had to make sure we were up at 3 a.m. every single night to remove a blue cooler from the ice machine. If we were sick or not on site for any reason, we had to make sure that someone would be there to remove the cooler from the ice machine for us. So what's in the cooler anyways? I asked Wayne, and he lifted an eyebrow and said, "Well, I don't know. I've never opened it and never asked." I mean, come on, it's kind of weird, right? I kept going. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Is someone's midnight ice cream really that important? It doesn't need to make sense. It's not your job to know what's in the cooler. It belongs to the owner. If you want this job, you won't open that cooler. Something about the way he looked at me when he said that. It made my skin crawl. His eyes were sad, cheeks saggy. I couldn't quite place the expression on his face. Pity, maybe. Fear? I didn't want to talk about the cooler anymore, so I dropped it. Rule number 4. flip the switch next to the breaker box every night at 8 a.m. This was another rule that had bothered me. I had to be awake at 3 a.m. and then get back up at 5 a.m. to flip some switches. Apparently, if I didn't flip the switch, the power would short out, but the switch didn't actually connect to anything I could see. If I wasn't getting free housing out of this, I probably would have walked away right then. But again, I needed the job, so I just kept my mouth shut. Rule number 5, do not respond to room 119. Okay, now this one just seems rude, I told Wayne. Nah, he replied. Nobody's ever in there. The owner keeps it empty in case he stops by. If you get a call to go to that room, ignore it. It's a prank caller. Or a mistake. Rule number 6. Count the number of tools in your box after every task. And this was the rule that would save my life, according to Wayne. Once upon a time, he'd been the apprentice handyman at the Cozy Comfort Motel too. The previous handyman was practically ancient by the time Wayne began training, and he started to get forgetful. Late in the evening, he was finishing up a repair to some of the roofing at the back of the building. The younger man would have been finished in half the time, but he was slowing down in old age and stubborn enough that he refused to let Wayne give him a hand. He sent Wayne inside to man the phone and stayed out alone. It was late, he was tired, and when he finally finished, he dropped the tools off in the supply closet and immediately went to his room. It gets creepy out by the highway at night. The Cozy Comfort isn't close to much, and back in the day, there wasn't so much as a gas station around. It got shockingly dark. You couldn't even see any stars. Looking out the windows gave Wayne a funny feeling. A little pit in his stomach and something seemed off. He decided to count the old handyman's tools, and one was missing a hammer. The old man must have just left it on the roof. Probably forgot to count. Did leaving the hammer out there count as a mess? I wasn't sure. Even at the time, Wayne knew how important the rules were. He thought about going out to retrieve the missing tool himself to save the old man some trouble. But it was so dark. It was like his legs locked up when he tried to move towards the exit, keeping him in place. Some instinct to stay safe in the light instead of going out into the night. So Wayne left it. The old man was already asleep. Wayne set his alarm for 3 a.m. and headed to bed himself. Now, Wayne usually handled the early morning duties on his own to let the old man rest, but the man didn't get up for breakfast either. He tried knocking. No response, so he got a screwdriver and jiggled the lock. He was probably overreacting, he reasoned. But the man was frail, and Wayne was worried. And it was immediately clear that he'd been murdered. Now, Wayne didn't describe this next part to me in detail, but it was clear to me that whatever happened was graphic. Cleanup, he told me, took 3 months. One of those was just to get rid of the blood. The police determined that someone had stolen the hammer from the old man and had used it to beat him to death. Why didn't anyone hear? Wayne asked. Must have good soundproofing here, the police answered humorlessly. And this wasn't the strangest part, though. The strangest part was that a few days later, Wayne was finishing up a repair, and he counted all his tools and the missing hammer. It was back, clean and like it was never lost. And alongside, it was a little note. It simply read, "Thank you." Honestly, I wasn't sure I believed him, but I got the point. The rules were important. The first year and a half of my job was pretty uneventful. Even the mysterious cooler was just a regular cooler. It even felt empty every night. But I followed the rules. I didn't like every part of the job, but it helped me save up to get out of Louisiana one day. I certainly didn't plan on staying here for 30 years myself. And then about 6 months ago, things began to go terribly, terribly wrong. It started with a call. The concierge was taking a smoke break. I told him I'd keep an eye on the phones. It was the tail end of winter, so the lobby was basically dead anyways. It was hard to see how the place stayed in business sometimes, so I picked up the phone, expecting to hear some rambling about how the water in the sink isn't hot enough. And at first it didn't seem like anyone was there. "Hello." I said, no response. I almost hung up until I heard a faint, hitched, breathing sound, like someone trying to cry without making a noise. "I need help," a woman's voice whispered. "Okay, ma'am, I'm happy to help. What room are you in?" 119. She told me. Well, shoot. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm not permitted to work in that room. Had a nice day, I said. I need help, Jack, she said. Please. I was starting to get irritated, but I tried to keep my cool. I knew that a prank caller probably thought being this creepy was funny, but she took it too far by using my real name. Jack. Jack, she said again. And I decided the best course of action would be to just hang up. Later that night, after I went back to bed, after dropping off the cooler with Wayne, there was a knock on my door. It was a concierge. She was clearly tired, but had the bad luck of being assigned the night shift at the front desk. There's someone asking for you on the phone, she told me. Grumbling to myself, I walked over to pick up the line. Hello, please. And it was that damn woman again. Okay, this is not funny, I snapped. Just check on the door, she whispered. And then the line went dead. Not like it was hung up, more like it was cut and my skin prickled. I told the woman at the front desk that one of the guests had a clogged toilet and I'd be back later. I didn't wake Wayne up. I knew he wouldn't be happy with me messing around with room 119. So to access the rooms, I had to leave through the front door and travel up a short ramp outside. Each room door opened to a small fenced sidewalk overlooking the parking lot. Easy enough. But the closer I got to room 119, the more exposed I felt. It was like I was being watched. My fingers brushed the door handle. Everything seemed fine, and I cursed myself for letting a prank caller get me all worked up over nothing until I noticed something along the crack in the bottom of the door, a shadow passing along it like someone was in there with a bang. The door swung open. It knocked into me with enough force that I flipped back over the railing and onto the hood of a car parked on the other side. The car alarm started going off, and to this day, I swear on my mother's grave that I could hear a woman laughing. The security guard came rushing out with Wayne hot on his heels. Someone was in there. I choked out as the guard held me to my feet. Nobody's there, he told me, grim, and I was shaken. But aside from some bruises, I physically was okay. Wayne, on the other hand, looked furious. It's not just about the phone, he hissed at me. It's about the room. You responded. Over the next few weeks, things around the cozy comfort became even harder to explain. I was jumpy, shaken. I even considered quitting. But where would I go? I still hadn't saved up enough to buy a place to live. I was still paying off my mother's medical debt. I wouldn't make money like this anywhere else. And so I stayed even when I felt eyes on me while I sat alone in my room. Even when shadows played by the window like someone was outside. Even when I was on the second floor. Once I swore the shower turned on by itself. And then a few nights ago, I was getting the cooler out of the ice machine. Wayne was with me. That's the only way I know that I wasn't going crazy, because he saw it too. The ice machine was on the first floor in a hall near the restrooms at the back of the lobby. My point is, it's a dead end. There isn't a way, in or out, someone wouldn't be able to see. Now everything that day had been normal. I'd even started to relax after the incident with room 119. Wayne and I were even joking around a little. That is until we got closer to the machine and realized it smelled awful, like someone had frozen a bunch of pond sludge and leftovers and left it to get freezer burnt. I'd spent the past year and a half dealing with all sorts of sewage on the job, but I still felt myself gagging. Eyes watering at the stench, Wayne opened the hatch to the ice machine, and everything inside looked normal. The cooler was there too, tucked into the ice like normal. When he picked it up, it was clear that whatever was inside was the cause of the issue. A hairline crack at the base of the cooler dripped a black, chunky fluid onto the ice. It was warm enough that the ice was melting, spreading the fluid out in a caustic, watery mess. It spattered the substance onto the floor after he lifted it out of the ice machine, but whatever was inside was heavy enough that he had to set it on the ground and stretch his back. I don't know how he wasn't gagging after being so close to the thing. Maybe we should get some gloves, Wayne, I said. He was going to say something, but was interrupted by the sound of the plastic of the cooler splitting apart at the seams. The black fluid was coating the floor at this point. So much of it was spilling out like hot, rancid oil. I was certain it wouldn't have all been able to fit inside. And then the cooler cracked like an egg, and impossibly, fingers appeared at the cracks. a woman's fingers helping to tear the cooler apart. They stretched out, and fingers followed by arm, then followed by a woman's head with long hair dripping with the dark fluid. The arms groped wildly around, reaching for purchase and scraping the cooler along the ground. "Oh no, we have to get it to the kitchen," Wayne said. "We what?" I replied a little too loud. The hands found traction on the ground then, and the cooler began to scuttle like a spider. "Get the pool net," Wayne told me. "We have to catch it." And then one of the hands grabbed at his ankle, and he slipped, falling into the black slime on the ground. He tried to move away, but whatever it was must have been incredibly slippery. Any attempt of his to get up was interrupted as he slid back onto the ground. The thing in the cooler jumped back and forth from hand to hand in some sort of sick little dance. Another crack in the cooler, and it revealed an eye, a pale, cloudy eye locked onto Wayne with the intensity of a wild animal. I scrambled to find the pool net as Wayne fought against whatever the hell was in the cooler. It had both arms around one of his legs, and it was pulling itself closer to him by the second. As I grew more desperate, I noticed that his foot was actually beginning to disappear into the cooler itself. His mouth was open in a scream, but all I could hear was this static, like a radio tuned to the wrong station. It was so loud, combined with the smell of the oil. My senses were so overwhelmed. I just wanted to sit down and scream, but I didn't. I found the pool net, and I used the handle to beat the creature's hands. I was smacking it as hard as I could, and Wayne twisted free with a kick, and used the ice machine itself to haul himself free. I managed to catch the creature as it scuttled, and I flung it through the swinging doors to the kitchen like a hockey puck. The static faded. I was panting hard and coated in stinking slime, and my own fear-tainted sweat. Wayne was clearly rattled too, probably even more than I was. "What now?" I asked him. "Okay, well, let's get someone to help us clean up, and then we'll go back to our rooms," he said. The next morning, the hallway looked like nothing had happened, despite our best efforts. The black oil had stained the floor a purple red where we tried to get it up, but now it was sparkling clean. Well, as clean as anything else is at the Cozy Comfort at least. I would have thought I dreamed it if until the following night, instead of a blue cooler waiting for us in the ice machine, it was red and sure. It wasn't leaking noxious oil, but it was clear enough that something tangible had happened. Something real. Couldn't stand it. I decided I'd just leave and I would not come back. No 2 weeks notice, no forwarding address, nothing. I would just use my savings to drive back to my dad's place. Wayne wouldn't even try to stop me, and I got about 3 hours into my drive. When I had to stop for gas, a man had pulled up at the pump across from me. At first, I only noticed him because of the car he was driving. It was a mint green 1959 Cadillac Fleetwood. Perfect condition. It was actually my dream car, so the driver stepped out of the vehicle and closed the door behind him with a lazy movement with sleeping lion. And something told me this man was dangerous, and the way he was staring me down only reinforced that thought. The man walked over to where I was parked and rested against the hood of my car. Wasn't much older than me, late 20s at most, but he was dressed like he walked out of a Norman Rockwell painting. "You gotta go back, Jack," he told me. I clenched my jaw. The man smirked, and then he pulled a carton of filterless cigarettes out of his pocket. He lit a smoke in the middle of a gas station, and wordlessly, he offered me one. Now, I don't smoke, but I didn't want to risk refusing, so I took one and I held it loosely in my hand while he smoked. "Your resignation has been declined. The owner wants you back." He winked at me and flicked the cigarette, still lit out of the ground. And then he got back in his car and just drove away. I looked at the cigarette in my hand. I thought about what I'd seen earlier. I thought about Wayne and the story of the murdered man. There wasn't any leaving, was there? I filled up my car and I headed back to the Cozy Comfort Motel. I wanted to ask Wayne if he'd ever broken the rules, but when my car pulled into the lot of the motel, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get the chance. The air felt like it was a crackling ozone during a thunderstorm. A car peeled out of the parking lot, and behind it another family was throwing their luggage into the trunk of a sedan. They were red, sweaty, and their eyes were rolling in fear. A woman held a crying baby. "What's going on?" I asked. "The damn handyman's gone crazy." Nobody's got cell service to call the police. He cut them. The man didn't get a chance to continue. The disembodied radio static returned louder than ever, this time accompanied by a piercing tea kettle whistle that forced everyone to their knees. The man ground his teeth and got his family into the car. He then crawled into the passenger seat and escaped the motel parking lot, blood dripping from his ears. The static subsided, but my heartbeat felt loud enough that it didn't matter. He'd said something about the handyman. Something must have happened to Wayne. Doors to guest rooms were swinging open and closed, giving me fleeting glimpses within. A sigil was drawn on the wall of one room, another. It looked like it was entirely converted into opaque white plastic. One had a couple inside who looked like they were in the midst of arguing, and when I looked again, they were just holding each other and sobbing, black oil running down their faces. Room 119 stayed closed, and somehow that felt worse. Sinister. I heard a woman's voice in my ear yell my name, and I turned and nobody was there. I rushed to the lobby. The concierge was dead. So was the security guard. They'd been laying out on the front desk, arms tied behind their back, their eyes closed and facing up like they were asleep. There weren't even any marks on them. No sign of a struggle. It was like someone just tied them up and they'd just chosen to die. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the ice machine shook against the ground. It was rattling so hard that the floor was shaking. And then I heard Wayne yelling from the electrical room. "Give her back," he said, sounding almost childlike. "God, give her back." I swung the door open, and I saw him taking an axe to the electrical panel. He turned to face me, eyes red and wide. I forgot to flip the switch this morning. I put a hand on his shoulder, and for a minute I was afraid he'd take the axe to me. Instead, he let me pull him away and outside. He dropped the axe, and his skittering hand flashed out of the dark and pulled it into some impossible corner, and we ran. We made it to the relative safety of the parking lot where Wayne filled me in. So years ago, before the death of the old handyman, before he started working at the Cozy Comfort, his daughter had been hired as a maid here. She'd been uncomfortable with some of the rules. No going into rooms after certain times, rules about little trinkets under the mattresses, and food at the edge of the woods around the motel. And then one day, she never came home. Police classified her as a runaway. Didn't even bother to look for her. And Wayne took a job at the Cozy Comfort himself, hoping to find some answers. 30 years later, and nothing. Everyone had their own rules, little rituals they needed to complete. The owner was more of a mystery than a man. But Wayne was sure of one thing. Something evil lived in the Cozy Comfort Motel, and someone liked it that way. He was shaken after the thing in the cooler lunged at him, because it had his daughter's eyes. I couldn't think about anything else. I couldn't. And then when you left, I got distracted and I forgot to follow the rules, he said. And everything just went to hell. I don't know what the hell we're supposed to do. I have an idea, I said. You see, I brought a little something extra with me back from the gas station. Gallons and gallons of gas. As handyman and handyman's apprentice, Wayne and I have a key to every room. And we worked quickly, coating the motel and my net worth in gasoline. Door 19 wouldn't budge, but I put as much as I could in the threshold. I even tried to splash as much as I could under the door. And when every jug was empty, Wayne and I stepped back. I lit the cigarette the man had given me earlier, and I flicked it into the gas puddles. We watched the Cozy Comfort burn to a crisp. We've been on the road for a few days now. Not sure if anyone has reported on the fire. Our phones won't get much of a signal, and every station on the radio, it's nothing but dead air. I was okay with it, though. We were free of that godforsaken place. That was until earlier today. We were driving up the interstate when we passed a billboard next to the road, and this is what it said. Cozy Comfort Motel. Franchise opportunities available. New locations opening soon. Detention. Joel hated detention. Detention and Mr. Briars and his classmates. Detention, Mr. Briars and his classmates and school in general. Pretty much anything and anyone associated with school he hated. Not that he showed it, though. He was pretty good at playing the game in company and with his parents, but that didn't do anything to reduce his dislike of it all. Detention was at number 1, though, on his list of hates. Mr. Briars had picked him out at the end of his final class of the day for some minor infraction, dumping him in an empty classroom with orders to read a book silently, with the added kicker that he couldn't leave until he'd finished it. He hadn't argued. Mr. Briars had it in for him for some reason, always singling him out, always watching him from the corner of his eye. Whatever. Going with the flow seemed the best option to deal with the asshole for the time being. Joel turned the book over in his hands. It was a light, slim book, the cover a garish cartoon picture of various men dressed in green tights and tunics, carrying a variety of swords and wooden staffs, except for the one stood in the middle of the group holding a bow and bearing a wide smile on a blonde mustached face beneath the hood. Joel groaned inwardly as he read the title in typical Old English font emblazoned across the top. A Tale of Sherwood Forest. Choose your own fate adventure. Great, he thought sarcastically. It was one of those books, the kind where you had to select from a set of options and flip to another page depending on your choice. On and on until your character died or achieved some kind of bullshit goal. The last time he'd read one of these, he must have been 10 or 11, and even then he'd grown bored with it and hadn't finished. Mr. Briars would probably test him on it when he came back like the unapologetic shit he was, so he'd best just get it over with. Slouching back in his chair, Joel turned to the first page. Welcome, adventurer. You have come seeking fame and fortune by joining Robin Hood's merry men. Tari is not in the woods, though. Hold fast to your decisions, and you shall find the goal you seek. Joel snorted derisively before continuing on to the first section. One sunlight pierces the canopy of trees high above you, sending shafts of light through the sky of leaves to illuminate your path. You entered Sherwood Forest but a short time ago, and already it is as if the woods have swallowed you whole. You have on you your trusty sword, 3 days' worth of provisions, flint and tinder, plus a warm cloak, which seems a burden on such a fine summer's day. The forest path is wide, the day pleasant, and your heart beats strongly in your chest. Today is the day when you shall achieve your goal. You will find Sir Robin of Locksley, the fabled Robin Hood, and join his troop of merry men. It's not long before you come upon a fork in the path. To the left, it curls off toward an area of the forest where a villager told you a small river runs through, but there are plenty of man-made fordings available. Should you look to the right, the path is more or less straight, but appears to head into a dark, dense part of a forest, which looks rather foreboding. If you wish to go left toward the river, turn to 8. If you wish to go right down the ominous forest path, turn to 11. They read like any of these books he'd picked up before. Joel looked at the options. Only an idiot goes looking for trouble in dark and foreboding places, he thought. And wasn't a river crossing and a contest a part of the Robin Hood legend? He chose accordingly. 8 before you even see the river, your eyes pick out the sound of swift running water somewhere up ahead. You quicken your pace, eager to both see the source of the sound, but also to splash some water in your face to relieve yourself of some of the heat you feel. From such a long walk, you pass a large gnarled oak tree and finally see the fast-flowing river, the sunlight bouncing off its surface, and is that a fish or two you see slicing around beneath? Kneeling by the bank, you dip your cloth into the cool, refreshing water, then lift it and place it gingerly on the back of your neck. The initial cold is a shock, but a welcome one, and you feel the coolness spread across your body. The bigger shock, though, is when you hear a loud voice calling from across the way. "Oh, stranger, if you seek to cross this river, you must first pass me." You look up in surprise and see a giant of a man dressed in a dark brown leather jerkin with hands almost as big as the thick beard upon his rugged face, standing on the opposite bank next to a large log which breasts the river. In his right hand stand a long, thick piece of wood. You recognize it as a quarterstaff, and that he must be none other than Little John himself, one of the fabled merry men you seek. In an instant you understand his meaning, and looking next to the large log on your side of the bank is another quarterstaff, obviously for the use of travelers such as you. Finally, a chance to prove yourself. Despite your eagerness, however, he does look rather large, and you wonder at your chances. If you wish to fight Little John, turn to 15. If you wish to return the way you came and try the other path, turn to 11. Ah, he knew it. Barely in, and he was already dealing with one of the merry men. Joel wanted this over with, so going back wasn't an option. Best to carry on forward and get it done. 15 eagerly, you sweep the quarterstaff up in your hand and approach the log bridge. As you step on carefully, so does Little John, easily twirling the quarterstaff in his hands. You wonder to yourself how many people have come this way before, only to find themselves swiftly beaten and pushed into the river. Your opponent is confident, there is no doubt. But if the stories are true, his naivety is just as strong as his biceps. Should you fight fairly or trick him somehow? If you still wish to retreat and try the other path, turn to 11. If you wish to fight fairly, turn to 18. If you wish to cheat, turn to 23. Now, that was an interesting option, he thought. Again, going back wasn't going to happen. Of the other two choices, though, Joel knew which one he leaned towards. Fighting fairly might be the more honorable way, but to him, the result was always the key factor to his way of thinking. 23. As you approach him, you raise your quarterstaff in what you hope is a defensive position. He smiles good-humoredly, rolls his shoulders to loosen himself up, winks, and quickly raises his staff for an almighty blow. As his staff reaches its peak, pretend to look past him and shout there. His head whips round a check, instantly forgetting about you. You take your chance, raise your staff high, and aim a truly thunderous whack across his skull. Your arms vibrate with the impact, and you think you're going to drop the staff. Nervously, you watch as Little John turns his head back to face you. His face moves quickly from confusion to anger, and then dazed, he falls to his knees and topples off the log, but is still able in his daze to roughly grab at a protruding broken branch on the underside of the trunk. The cold water returns him partly to his senses, and he slowly grins up at you before speaking. Well done, stranger. Robin has a need for men with sense as well as strength. Give me a hand up, and I'll take you to him. If you offer him your hand, turn to 26. If you wait for him to climb back up himself, turn to 31. It was a difficult choice, Joel realized. Offering to help him up would put him in a dangerous position. Off balance, Little John could pull him into the water, or anything. Joel could see the way the book was heading, though. Once you bested an opponent in this fairy tale land of good and evil, you always fell back on the honorable option. He thought it was a load of crap, but the answer the book was expecting was obvious at this point. 26, you looked down at Little John, bedraggled and wet and being slammed by the river, and offered your hand to help him up. As he reaches up to grasp your hand, though, you instead wrap your offer hand once more around the quarterstaff and drive its end into his face, catching him off guard. You feel the impact resonate up the wood as his nose shatters beneath the blow. He bellows in rage and agony, one hand moving to cover his now bloody face. You quickly strike at his remaining hand, holding onto the branch under the log, and hear the satisfying crack of broken bone. He yells once more and releases his hold, the river quickly drawing him under and away. You watch him struggle for a short while, then throw both quarterstaffs into the water and carry on your way. Turn to 28. Okay, thought Joel. What the hell just happened? He hadn't expected that at all. Thinking about it, though, it made a lot of sense. Who knew what Little John might have tried? His character's response was sensible. He lulled his opponent and then acted, removing a potential danger. Joel found himself warming to this book. 28. The path on the other side of the river is barely visible, and so obviously not a commonly used means of moving through Sherwood Forest. Logically, therefore, it must be a route used only by the merry men and Robin Hood himself. Gradually, the path grows narrower, the trees thinner and closer together on each side, until finally the path appears to be a corridor of trees leading to a dead end. But two large arches with a bowman stood in front of each. They looked like twins, an image reinforced by them both speaking at the same time and with the same words as you approach. Greetings, stranger. You have bested Little John, but wisdom is as valuable as skill with weapons in Robin's camp. Behind us lie two ways forward. One leads onto the camp, the other to a hidden pit filled with wooden stakes. You may ask one of us a single question, but beware, one of us will lie and the other tell the truth. Which route do you choose? You try to see any differences in the past beyond the arches, but they look identical. Your only choices appear to be to ask the bowman or take a chance and pick a route at random if you take the left arch. Turn to 36. If you take the right, turn to 38. If you ask one of the bowmen which archway leads to the camp, turn to 42. If you ask one of the bowmen which archway the other bowman will say leads to the camp, turn to 62. If you use intimidation on the bowman, turn to 49. Now that was a curious last option, Joel thought. The first two random choices didn't appeal, and whilst he was confident in his logic what the right choice was, he was drawn to the last action. It made a lot more sense to him, skipping the need to risk a correct answer against one he could guarantee if approached right. 49. You walk slowly up to one of the bowmen, rubbing your chin thoughtfully as if thinking of an appropriate question abruptly. You draw your sword, catching him off guard and grabbing the nearest from behind, placing your blade against his throat before the other can react. The one you are holding trembles beneath your grip whilst the other watches you nervously, fingering his bow. If you ask the bowman to tell you which arch leads to the camp, or you'll kill the one you're holding, turn to 43. If you kill the bowman you are holding immediately, turn to 47. Another interesting set of options that threats were useful, Joel knew from past experience, but only if the other guy knew you'd carry them out. Carl, in 5th grade, had learned that lesson the hard way. The answer was obvious. 47 without a flicker of emotion. You draw your sword across the throat of the man you are holding. He gurgles in alarm as the flesh parts and blood pours forth from the wound across his neck. Dropping him to the floor to breathe his last, you point your blade at the stomach of the other bowman. If you ask the remaining bowman to tell you now which arch leads to the camp, turn to 56. If you force the bowman to go ahead of you by sword point through one of the arches, turn to 53. Both choices would work, Joel thought casually, but one of them obviously added an element of insurance to his character's survival. 53, prodding the remaining bowman with a point of your now bloody sword, you state coldly that what happened to his friend can quite easily happen to him, and that he will now lead you through the correct archway to the camp. Reluctantly, he moves toward the right arch. If you follow the remaining bowman through the arch, turn to 68. If you first run the remaining bowman through with your sword, killing him, turn to 65. Joel was caught at this one. It wasn't obvious, and the answer is the last. Keeping the remaining bowman alive added an element of risk if he tried to escape. But then how far did the man's loyalty to Robin Hood and his cause go? Was it so far that he'd even picked the wrong archway, even if it meant risking his own life? Despite the risks, having the captive bowman along gave Joel more options. He realized 68. The bowman has been stumbling ahead of you forlornly at sword point for a few minutes when you notice his furtive glances back and the slowing of his pace. Prepared, you wait until he makes his move. 10 steps later, he spins and makes a grab for your sword. You efficiently stab him through the stomach, then kick his shuddering body off your blade as he falls backwards. The earth ahead of you gives way, and his body falls into the trap you had previously been warned about. Skirting the edge, you look down to see his bloody and broken form pierced upon multiple sharpened stakes, one piercing his cheek and exiting his mouth and giving him a permanently shocked expression. Content, he is dead. You make your way back along the path to the 2 arches. You take some time to dig a shallow grave a little way from the arches and bury the bowman you killed earlier, covering the mound with additional loose leaves and sticks. Once happy with your work, you turn and take the left archway. Turn to 22. He'd known he was right to keep him alive. Additional resources were a useful buffer between himself and unpleasant situations, like the friend he cultivated at school. As long as they could be controlled or manipulated, they were handy to have around. Those that weren't could be discarded easily enough later on, should the need arise. 22. You've been walking along the path for a while now, and decided to take a rest and eat some of your food. Looking around, you find a suitable tree stump and sit down, digging out from your bag half a loaf and a wedge of strong cheese wrapped in linen. You take a large bite of each and wash them down with some water from the skin hanging from your belt. Whilst you are eating, you pull out the letter that lay beside the bread in your bag. Opening it, you read once more the instructions given to you yesterday. Hail and well met. You have come recommended by Prince John himself as a person who can produce results. Most in these parts have heard of the bandit in the woods, the one who calls himself Robin Hood. He calls himself a champion of the people, but in truth he is nothing more than a common criminal. However, his propaganda amongst the unwashed and uneducated masses has proven impossible to overcome. No one is willing to come forward and provide information on his whereabouts. Therefore, I need you to enter Sherwood Forest and infiltrate his camp. He has broken the rule of law, as have his followers, and they must be treated accordingly. Robin Hood must be executed, and evidence brought back to me of his demise. Deal with the others as you see fit. Succeed, and the rewards will be great. Fail, and they will most likely kill you. Good Fortune, the Sheriff of Nottingham. You fold the message back up and ponder what you should do with it whilst you enjoy the remainder of your meal. If found on you, the merry men will treat you harshly. By the same token, it would be useful as evidence of your true sighting should you encounter any of the sheriff's men. You also realize, if used correctly, it could be planted as evidence against another within the camp, thus sowing division and discord. If you burn the letter, turn to 78. If you keep the letter, turn to 103. Suddenly a lot more things made sense to Joel. Sure, the character in the book wanted to join the merry men, but his motives had never been fully spelled out before. The fact he actually worked for the Sheriff of Nottingham appealed to Joel. It was far more interesting to be a manipulative spy than a two-dimensional woodland terrorist. He also liked the idea of keeping the letter. It would be a risk for his character. But he was guessing an option would come up later to plant it in the camp, or Little John might make another appearance, and if he still had the letter in his possession, one of the options given might be to plant it on Little John himself as a means of discrediting him in any accusations he might make against Joel. 103. You carefully place the folded letter back in your bag, stretch your weary muscles, and continue down the path. Gradually, your nose begins to pick out the smells of roasting pig in your ears, the faint crackle of a campfire, and the bustle of people. The path you're on twists sharply ahead, and as you follow it round, you suddenly find yourself facing a reasonably sized encampment. Makeshift huts and canopies of thick hides stretch between a rough circle of trees surrounding a large campfire, a boar roasting on the spit above it. Moving in and around a camp, you see a fair number of people, somewhere between 20 and 30, engaged in various activities. Some are checking their bows, a few engaged in mock sword battles, whilst others are mending tunics and shoes. Your eyes, though, are drawn to one man sitting before the fire, a large hood covering his face, as two people sit either side, talking earnestly to him in low whispers. You go to move forward when you feel the sharp point of an arrow tip sticking into the small of your back. Turning your head slightly, you see a stranger with a drawn bow behind you, who then reaches round and removes the sword from your scabbard. He does not speak, but prods you in the back a couple times with the arrow, indicating for you to move. Slowly you walk forward toward the fire and the hooded man if you want to try and escape. Turn to 92 if you simply continue forward. Turn to 79. Why try to escape? Thought Joel. His character was where he wanted to be, and he doubted it would end well if his character tried to escape with a drawn bout, pressing a sharp arrow into his back. No, now was the time to see how things would play out now that he'd reached his target. 79 as you get closer to the fire. The two men talking to the hooded man notice you and fall silent, turning to look hard-faced at you. The hooded man reaches up slowly and pulls his hood back, turning to face you. His golden hair and mustache would have been enough identification, but the sardonic grin and twinkle in his eyes introduces him far better than any spoken word. The Earl of Locksley, Robin Hood himself. He waves back the man behind you, appraising you for a moment in silence, and then offers his hand. You reach forward and shake it, and he laughs heartily, slapping you on the shoulder. Welcome, friend. To get this far, you must have bested Little John and the twins. This shows you have both strength of character and wisdom, both qualities I look for in my merry men, as you see. We don't live comfortably, but we live well enough. The forest provides whilst we work to topple the sheriff and behind him, Prince John. Now, as well as robbing the rich, there are other roles in the camp which need to be done. You have to look for a smithy or a cook for me. Which do you fancy? If you choose to work with a blacksmith, turn to 6. If you choose to work with a cook, turn to 112. Sure, thought Joel. Blacksmithing offered easy access to weapons and the opportunity to thin the herd of Robin's lackeys with them. But it would be a slow process, he guessed, and would place his character under growing suspicion the more bodies that turned up. No, if his character was to succeed, a quiet, unassuming role in camp would be the ideal place to start. 112. Excellent. Come with me to meet our resident cook. Oh, Friar Tuck, you were complaining just this morning about needing help, and see if I haven't answered your lament already. Robin leads you around to the other side of the fire, where sits an overly large man in a friar's robe, stirring a large pot of vegetables over a smaller fire. He looks up from sipping from a wooden ladle, his cheeks ruddy and his eyes bright. Well, bless my soul. My prayers have been answered. No time like the present. Come help me with this evening's meal. Go gather some herbs from the stew. I'm preparing to go alongside the meat. He points vaguely off to the side, returning his attention to the pot. You look over to where he pointed, noticing a small herb garden he must be cultivating. Grabbing a clay bowl nearby, you walk over and start picking handfuls of herb leaves. As you do so, though, you notice in the undergrowth nearby a wild plant growing whose leaves you know to be deadly if consumed in even the smallest quantity. If you return with just the herb leaves, turn to 130. If you return with leaves from both the herb and poisonous plant, turn to 109. Yes, this is good, thought Joel. A subtle attack that could incapacitate some, if not all, the merry men at once. It was ideal. He'd done something similar with his stepfather, crushing sleeping tablets into his drink before he'd driven to work one morning. And that had gone quite well. 109. You walk back over casually, being careful to keep the clay bowl hidden by your body. To avoid the friar's eyes noticing the difference in leaves, you quickly grind the leaves down until they are the same unidentifiable shreds. You pass the mortar to the friar, and he favors you with a pleasant smile of thanks before pouring the contents into his cooking pot. Turn to 72. This should be interesting, thought Joel, eagerly turning the pages. Now 72. To your delight, the entire camp partakes of the stew prepared by the friar before attacking the roasting pig. All sat round the campfire, engaging in friendly banter and conversation in its warm orange glow. You also accept the bowl when offered, but are careful to dispose of its contents whilst pretending to eat it. It's not long before the first merry man staggers to his feet, clutching his stomach, his breath rasping from his mouth. Several of his fellows dash over to see if they can help, though you can see a few themselves stagger as they do so. The first man falls to his knees, coughing blood from grimaced lips, his eyes bulging in their sockets. He collapses, prone on his side, choking weakly on the blood spilling from his mouth, then stops. Others are now complaining loudly of agonizing pains, one going so far as to stagger uncontrollably into the fire, knocking the roast pig to one side and catching himself on fire. He shrieks in agony as the flames pour up his legs and arms, melting his clothes and skin a few short steps, and he drops to the ground. None have come to his aid, though, as the carnage continues throughout the camp. Bodies now litter the floor in various states of painful disarray, following their individual death throes. Gouts of blood abundant everywhere within the light of the flickering flames. You pick your way through the bodies, looking for Robin as the only one with a hood. It doesn't take long to find him. Surprisingly, he's still breathing, though with difficulty through blood-speckled lips. He has propped himself up against a log as you walk over, his eyes displaying that he knows what has befallen him and his men. And so my dream ends, struck down from within by a traitor. He coughs up a little more blood, but struggles to continue speaking despite the obvious pain he is in. If any honor exists within you, please grant me this final boon. Bury me here with my loyal men and true. Do not make me a spectacle for the sheriff, I beg. A final cough rips up through his throat, spilling blood and bile down his green tunic. Robin Hood and his merry men are no more. If you honor his final request and bury him with his men, turn to 74. If you ignore his request and return with evidence to the sheriff, turn to 164. Joel barked a laugh. Well, that was surprisingly easy. He'd worried that it might have come down to some kind of stupid single combat in the end. Violence had its place as a tool, but it still had that element of unpredictability. Far better to plan and strike when least expected, if at all possible. So what to do with Robin Hood's body? Much like his stepfather's, when he'd idly viewed it lying in state, a corpse was just a corpse, a bag of meat and bones with no rights to further affect the living with its demands. The only function it had now was if its demise could be of benefit to those still alive. 164. Rolling Robin Hood's body over with your foot. You examine his eyes for any farther sign of life, then drag it over a nearby tree stump. After some effort, you prop his body in place, his neck and head now resting on its flat top. You grab a large axe from the blacksmith's hut, rest the blade gently against his neck for aiming, then raise it high above your head and bring it swiftly down. The blade easily cleaves through, blood spurting from the gaping wound as his head rolls down next to the stump. With effort, you rip the hood from his now decapitated body, slump down against the tree, and wrap his head within it. That done, you take one last look around the camp for any survivors, then pick one of the huts to sleep until morning. You awake refreshed, and upon exiting the hut are once more greeted by the cold corpses of the now unmerry men surrounding what remains of the spent campfire. Flies are already buzzing around them, and the stench of death will soon become unbearable a quick search later. You have gathered enough food and water for the return journey to Nottingham. If you take the path you used to enter the camp back to Nottingham, turn to 128. If you decide to go deeper into the forest, turn to 58. Again, another no-brainer. The job was done as far as Joel was concerned, and once your goals were achieved, that was the end of it. No reason to go looking for trouble. 128, the sheriff is ecstatic at your return and the evidence you bring, throwing a large banquet in your honor and showering you with gold. He also mentions that Prince John has decreed that on the successful completion of your mission, you will be both knighted and awarded all the lands previously owned by the late Earl of Locksley 3 days later. Dressed in the fine garb of a nobleman, and with your own servants, the sheriff bids you farewell from his castle as you leave to take up your new position. As you pass out of the gates of the drawbridge, you look up to the battlements and nod in parting to the gray face watching, the dead eyes of Robin Hood gazing down upon you from atop a spike. Then, now turn to 154. What? There's more. Probably a recommendation to read more of the books in the series, thought Joel. He had to admit, though, he liked this book despite his initial distaste for it. It appealed to him somehow. The answer is more in line with his way of thinking, to his surprise. He found he was interested in seeing what the other books in the line had to offer. 154. Congratulations on completing the story, adventurer, but your adventures don't have to stop there. If you've reached this result straight through without cheating, we'll know if you have and are interested in continuing your adventures. Ask the teacher who gave you this book for more details. They recognize something special in you, and we're always on the lookout for young people with a unique way of looking at the world. Your government needs people like you, and we can offer you real-life adventures you wouldn't believe, training in all the cool skills you've read in this book and more, and the opportunity to travel the world. If you're interested, please turn to the inside of the back cover and fill in your name and address in the space provided. Before returning the book, see you soon, adventurer. Joel smiled to himself, a genuine one for a change rather than the one he mainly employed when in social situations. He pulled the pen from the bag at his feet and turned to the inside of the back cover. As he started to write his name, though, the thick paper torn. Joel swore under his breath and tried again, slightly farther along from the tear. The same thing happened. Biting his lip to control his annoyance, he looked closer. The paper was far flimsier than it should have been. And was that writing visible underneath? Curious now, he tore the paper away and read what was written there. Thank you for your interest. You have decided to further your adventures with us. Not all are selected, however, and there is one final requirement for your application. If you look closer at the cover of this book, you will find it has 2 plastic layers. Before returning this book to the teacher who gave it to you, please peel off the thin layer on top of the book just prior to handing it over, being careful not to touch the cover with your bare hands once you have done so. 1 to 2 weeks after your teacher's death, we will contact you further. Mr. Briar sat alone in his office, looking through a pile of student folders for new candidates. 2 years he'd been at the school. 2 damn years dealing with prepubescent teens who thought they knew everything and their asshole parents at PTA meetings. Out of 6 possibles over that time, only Joel had come closest. Shame he'd had a good feeling about Joel. He had potential. Despite all the psych profiles and observation, it still came down to the book as the final test in Stage 1 recruitment. Despite your promise, you failed the book. Then your journey ended there. Literally one advantage of the psychology of the kids the agency was trying to recruit. If they failed the test, they were also the most likely candidates for teenage suicide, so closing the loop was easy. He looked over at Joel's book on the corner of his desk. Each candidate had their own book tailored to them specifically and supplied by the agency when they were to be tested. Company rules stated he wasn't allowed to read them himself. Just hold on to them for a day after the test and wait for a call if the call came. The candidate had got through. Otherwise, he just burnt the book, waited a month, and then staged the kid's suicide. Again, it was a shame the call hadn't come through. Joel had shown a lot of promise. Sighing, he leaned across his desk and picked the book up, turning it over in his hands, seeing Robin Hood's face beaming up at him amongst his gang of merry men. Yep, a real shame. Putting the book in his bag for disposal, he stood up and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. The kid must have spilled his soft drink on the cover or something, judging by the stickiness. Yeah, he had potential all right, but obviously tidiness wasn't part of it. On my first day, I arrived early. The school was old, tall, and neglected, walls stained from years of repainting over what couldn't be scrubbed away. The classroom they assigned to me was at the end of a corridor, just beyond the main stairwell. The plaque by the door read Room 302. It had the smell of every old classroom, thick with dust and chalk, that had been ground into the floorboards over decades. Old wooden desks lined the room, some with the initials of former students carved into them. There was something unsettling in the silence, but I shook it off. I was just nervous, I told myself. First days were always strange, especially in new schools, and this one did have its own peculiar reputation. But work was work, and I'd been in need of a job for months now. Then came the envelope. It was lying neatly on my desk when I arrived. There was no name on it, just the words read carefully, scrolled across the front in looping black ink. It was addressed to Mr. Lee, which meant someone knew I was coming. I picked it up, tore the top off, and slid out a single sheet of paper. It read rules for Room 302 Number 1. Do not let any child sit too close to one another. They must sit at least one desk apart at all times. Number 2, when a child stares at you for longer than a few seconds, look away and pretend not to notice. Number 3, if you hear scratching from under the floor, ignore it completely. Number 4, do not look at the clock between 2:11 and 2:13 p.m. Number 5. If a child brings you a gift, do not accept it. Politely decline and tell them to take it back. Number 6, do not acknowledge any child who knocks on the door after the bell rings. Number 7, if you find a child standing in the corner facing the wall, do not disturb them. They will leave on their own. And rule number 8, when the bell rings at 3:15, leave immediately. Do not stay behind to grade or organize. I read the list again, feeling its chill, but I brushed it off as some initiation prank for new teachers. Every school had its way of testing the new guy. I folded the paper and slid it into my bag. Maybe I'd keep it for later, just for laughs. Then, as if on cue, the door opened and an older woman stepped in. She wore glasses perched low on her nose, her silver gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't introduce herself, just nodded in my direction, then gestured to the desk. Her eyes were sharp, and I could tell she'd been here a long time. Are you Mr. Lee? She asked. I nodded. Yeah, I got her early. Just wanted to set up, Good, keep to the rules, she said. They aren't a joke. And with that, she left, the door clicking shut behind her. I wanted to laugh, maybe shout after her. All right, nice try. But something stopped me. The way she looked at me, like she knew something I didn't, lingered long after she'd left. I shook it off and got back to setting up my room. By the time the bell rang, I was seated at my desk, pretending to be relaxed. Students began to file in, looking as ordinary as any other kids, maybe a little pale. And yes, some were quieter than I was used to, but I told myself that was normal. New teacher, new year. Nothing out of the ordinary. I quickly noticed that the children had a strange habit. None of them sat next to one another. They chose their seats automatically, one desk apart, scattered. I hadn't even needed to remind them. Halfway through attendance, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I looked up, meeting the eyes of a girl sitting by the window, her face blank and unreadable. Her stare was relentless, her eyes oddly wide and too focused. I remembered rule number 2. I dropped my eyes to the attendance sheet, my fingers clenching the pencil tightly. She was still staring. I could feel it, but I forced myself to keep looking away, skimming the list over and over until I felt her finally look away. When I dared to look up again, her attention was back to the window. An hour passed, and the lesson moved along slowly. I was going over multiplication tables, trying to gauge their attention spans, which seemed remarkably good, but only because they didn't fidget. They sat eerily still, their eyes fixed on me with a seriousness that I hadn't expected. Then, during silent reading time, I heard a scratching, faint but distant, coming from below the floorboards. I stiffened. I wanted to look down, but rule number 3 surfaced in my mind. Ignore it completely. I kept reading out loud, forcing my voice to stay steady. The scratching grew louder, as if something just below us was clawing, trying to break through. It was hard not to react, but I forced myself to focus on the book, willing the noise to fade. The scratching finally stopped. A few of the kids exchanged looks, but none of them said a word about it. They returned to their books, and I realized that this was normal to them. They'd heard that noise before. I told myself I'd get through this day. I just had to follow the rules. During the next activity, I noticed 2 students, a girl and a boy, eyeing each other with what seemed like thinly veiled contempt. The boy had unnaturally sharp features. His eyes were the strange, cold gray. The girl, seated a desk away, had teeth that seemed a little too pointed, even from where I sat. Rule number 1. Don't let any child sit too close to another. I realized what that meant. I kept an eye on him, noticing how tense they were. Their eyes flicked towards each other now and then, and though they didn't make a move, there was something strange in the way they looked that made me feel like I was in a room full of predators, like they were watching each other for weakness. I cleared my throat, attempting to sound casual. All right, everyone, time to switch activities. Let's get out our spelling workbooks. The students moved slowly, each one pulling their workbook from their bag with almost mechanical precision. The boy's cold gaze never left the girl, her lips curled in a slight smirk, as if she was daring him to do something. I wondered how close they'd been seated last year before someone thought up this rule. I decided to walk the room just to break the tension. As I passed their desks, I noticed something unsettling. The girl had claw marks on the back of her chair, deep scratches gouged into the wood. The boy's chair was equally marked. I glanced down and saw that both of them had faint scars on their arms, hidden mostly by the long sleeves of their uniforms. They each noticed me looking, and their eyes sharpened without a warning. I pretended to be interested in the next student's workbook, instead feeling their eyes following me as I walked away. Lunch came and went without much incident. I took my break alone, eating my sandwich at my desk, trying to act normal despite the strange events of the morning. I kept my eyes on the clock, noting the time. I didn't want to accidentally glance at it at the wrong moment, but there was an odd itch of curiosity. What had happened if I did look between 2:11 and 2:13 p.m.? As if on cue, the intercom crackled to life. It was the same older woman who'd met me this morning. Her voice was clear and flat, and she didn't greet me or ask how my day was going. She simply said, "Remember the rules." Then the line went dead. The rest of the day crawled forward every minute, bringing me closer to that dreaded hour. I'd covered the first 3 rules without too much trouble, though I had to admit I had never felt so tense in my life. I tried not to watch the clock, and the children, for their part, seemed unbothered, like they'd done this dance countless times. And then, at exactly 2:10, I looked away from the clock, determined not to slip. I glanced around the room, trying to focus on anything else, but something felt wrong. The room seemed quieter. I couldn't explain it, but the usual shuffling, the sound of pages turning, it all faded. When I looked up, the children were sitting motionless, their eyes fixed on their desks, as if waiting for something. I counted the seconds in my head, my pulse racing, wondering what would happen if I dared look at the clock. But the thought of breaking the rule kept me rooted to my chair, my eyes pinned to the wall above the students' heads. The silence pressed in, thickening with every tick of the second hand that I could hear but not see. It was the longest 2 minutes of my life. Then, at exactly 2:13, the silence lifted, and the children moved again, as if nothing had happened. I let out a slow breath, shaken but relieved. I followed the rules. Nothing had happened. I'd gotten through the worst of it, or so I thought. But then, as the clock edged toward the final bell, one of the girls, the one who'd stared at me earlier, got up from her desk. She didn't look at me or anyone else as she walked to the front of the room. Clutching something in her hand, she stopped in front of my desk, staring down at the object she held. It was a crudely made doll sewn from scraps of fabric and buttons. Its face was drawn on with ink, dark eyes staring up at me from the fabric. "I made this for you," she said, holding it out. Her voice was barely a whisper. I remembered rule number 5. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "But I can't accept it. Why don't you keep it?" She blinked, her expression unreadable, and looked down at the doll in her hands for a moment. She looked almost hurt, but then with a strange, vacant nod, she turned and walked back to her desk, tucking the doll into her bag. I glanced at the clock. Noting that we only had a few minutes left, I just needed to get through until the bell. But as I looked back at the class, I saw a boy standing in the corner facing the wall. He hadn't been there a moment ago. My stomach twisted as Rule 7 echoed in my mind. Do not disturb them. They will leave on their own. He was completely still, hands at his sides, head tilted downward. The other students ignored him, eyes forward, as if he didn't exist. I forced myself to turn back to my desk, fighting the urge to glance over my shoulder. Seconds ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, until I heard the bell ring. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my fangs, barely sparing a glance at the class as I walked out the door. The older woman was standing by the exit watching me. She didn't smile or say anything, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Approval, maybe, or pity. I couldn't tell. "You did well," she murmured as I passed, almost too softly to hear outside. The afternoon air was sharp and cold, biting at my skin as I walked in my car. I didn't look back at the building, and didn't want to risk even a glimpse of room 302 through one of its grimy windows. I told myself I'd get used to it. Maybe it was just a rough first day, and that things would get easier. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something behind or that something had followed me. That night, I tried to push everything from my mind. I chalked it up to my nerves. Strange kids. A strict set of rules meant to scare the new guy. I'd been sleep deprived, and who knew? Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I could still feel those strange hollow eyes on me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The boy standing in the corner, the girl with her doll, the silent classroom waiting, as if for something hidden in the silence. I slept poorly, plagued by a dream where I stood alone in room 302, counting desks in the darkness, feeling like I was waiting for something that never came. I'd look down at the clock, its hands locked at 2:12, ticking but never moving. I'd wake up to the pitch-black room, my heart hammering, and stare into the darkness, half expecting to see one of those kids standing in the corner. The next morning I arrived at school early again, determined to keep the routine steady. If the kids were playing some game, or if the school had its own bizarre culture, I'd just handle it. I'd managed unruly classes before, and I wasn't about to let a bunch of middle schoolers spook me out of a job. Room 302. It felt different, though. As I walked in, the air was stale, almost thicker, as if something had changed overnight. I checked around at desks, almost on instinct, and froze. The desk where the boy with the gray eyes had sat the day before was empty, bare of all the usual scattered papers and books that the other students left behind. And there was something else. A faint, dark stain near the corner of the desk, as if someone had spilled ink or something else. The bell rang, jolting me out of my thoughts, and students began to trickle in. The kids filed in one by one, taking their seats with that same robotic precision. The girl who had offered me the doll entered last. She hesitated at the door, glancing toward the empty desk, and for the first time I saw a flicker of emotion on her face. And then, as if catching herself, she took her seat by the window, turning her face away from me. After I took attendance, I couldn't help myself. Hey, where's I stopped, realizing I couldn't remember the boy's name. I took it down yesterday, but it slipped from my mind. I cleared my throat, trying again. Anybody know where the boy who sat there is today? The silence that followed was suffocating. Every eye turned toward me, blank and unreadable. Not a single one spoke. Even the girl by the window refused to look at me. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes fixed downward. I tried to shrug it off, but there was tension in the room. I turned to the lesson plan, guiding them through their work, trying to ignore the unease in my stomach. The kids moved through their exercises, their faces expressionless, their eyes too wide and glassy. The day stretched on, slower than before, each hour bleeding into the next. By lunch, I felt like I'd been there for days. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that gray-eyed boy sitting in his seat or standing in the corner watching me. The other teachers ate in a separate lounge, but I wasn't sure I wanted to talk to him about this. They probably thought I was the weird one. And then, just after lunch, I found another note on my desk. It wasn't an envelope this time, just a single slip of paper torn at the edges, as if it had been ripped quickly from a notebook. It read, "There are consequences if you don't follow the rules." I stared at the note. Someone was trying to mess with me. Maybe the other teachers, maybe one of the students. But the handwriting was strange, thin, and uneven, as though written by someone who hadn't held a pen in a long time. I crumpled it up, shoving it into my bag, and forced myself to continue. When I looked up, every single one of them was watching me. The whole class. Their heads were all turned in my direction, their eyes blank, their expressions too still. I cleared my throat, turning back to the chalkboard, but I could feel them watching, their eyes boring into my back. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I moved through the motions, keeping my head down, careful to avoid the clock between 2:11 and 2:13. The scratching from beneath the floor started up again, louder this time, as if something was getting closer, clawing at the boards right below me. I kept my face expressionless, ignoring it, waiting for it to end. It wasn't until dismissal that things really went sideways. I was packing up my things when the girl who'd offered me the doll approached again. She was clutching a small object wrapped in cloth, holding it out with both hands. "Take it," she whispered. I took a slow breath, remembering rule number 5. "I'm sorry," I said. "I really can't. Why don't you keep it?" "Okay?" Her expression darkened, and for a moment her lips curled into something close to a snarl. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the expression vanished, and she looked down at the wrapped object, clutching it to her chest. "I tried to warn you," she murmured. She turned and walked to the door, joining the other students as they filed out in silence. The bell rang, and I packed up quickly, remembering rule number 8. I grabbed my things, checking the room one last time to make sure I hadn't left anything, then headed for the door. As I reached the threshold, I felt a strange urge to look back. Just one last look, something about that empty classroom felt wrong. I resisted stepping out into the hall, but the feeling followed me. On my way down the hall, I saw the janitor, an older man with a weathered face, mopping the floor with slow, careful precision. He looked up as I passed. His eyes lingered on me with something close to sympathy. They didn't tell you much, did they? I paused, unsure of how to respond about the rules. He nodded, his eyes dark and knowing. They don't tell anyone everything. They think it's easier that way, but easier ain't always safer. What does that mean? I asked. He sighed, glancing down at his mop. There's no way to keep it safe. Not completely. Not with those things. He looked up at me. Just remember, Mr. Lee, those kids are only part of it. There's more here. Things even they don't understand. Before I could ask anything else, he turned back to his mopping, his shoulders hunched, as though the weight of his own words pressed down on him. I drove home with those words in my head, the image of those empty eyes staring back at me. I wondered if the janitor had once been like me, somebody new there who was just trying to follow the rules. The next morning, I almost didn't go back. My alarm blared at 6:30, and for a long time I just lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about quitting, finding another job, telling myself I wasn't right for this place, but I needed the work, and leaving felt like admitting defeat. So I went back. Room 302 was silent when I arrived, but something was different. There was a new desk in the back, one I hadn't seen before, a small empty seat waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet. I remember the gray-eyed boy. The chill hit me. I'd never seen him again after that first day. It was like he'd vanished. The students arrived, filling the seats one by one, their faces blank and their eyes hollow. The girl who'd offered me the doll avoided looking at me. Her expression was dark. When she took her seat, I noticed something in her hand, a small wrapped bundle, just like the one she'd offered me the day before. It was quiet for the first half of the morning, almost too quiet. The children moved through their exercises with that same robotic precision, as if they were puppets acting out a familiar scene. I kept my distance, watching them with unease, trying to keep track of all the rules. And then, just before lunch, I heard a knock at the door. I froze, remembering rule number 6. I wasn't supposed to acknowledge any child who knocked after the bell, but this was different. The knock was slow, deliberate, echoing through the room with an eerie rhythm. The kids didn't react. They kept their heads down, their eyes fixed on their desks, as though they couldn't hear it. I stared at the door, my hand halfway to the doorknob, and then I caught myself. The rule was clear. Don't acknowledge it. The knock continued. Louder now. A steady, insistent sound that seemed to reverberate through the walls. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to ignore it, to focus on the lesson, to pretend I couldn't hear the door shaking on its hinges. But then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. After a moment, I exhaled, my shoulders slumping with relief. Whatever that had been, it was over now. But when I turned back to the room, I realized I'd made a mistake. The students were no longer sitting at their desks. They were standing, each one motionless, facing me with those same empty eyes. My stomach dropped, and I took a step back, almost tripping over my own feet. The silence was suffocating, filling the air with an unnatural stillness. The girl by the window, the one with the doll, stood slightly ahead of the others, her hands in front of her, holding that small wrapped bundle. "Mr. Lee," she whispered. I didn't respond. I couldn't. "You didn't follow the rules," she continued, a hint of sorrow in her voice, as though I disappointed her. I blurted out. "I didn't break any rules." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You looked back yesterday after the bell rang. You weren't supposed to." My heart sank. I had looked back just for a second. To see the empty classroom, I hadn't even thought it would count as breaking a rule. "Rules are rules," she said softly, and the other children echoed the words, their voices a chilling chorus. "Rules are rules." The words hung in the air like a judgment passed down. Look, come on, I didn't mean to." I started, but the girl raised a finger, silencing me. "Sometimes one mistake is all it takes," she said, stepping forward and holding out the wrapped bundle. "I tried to help you. I wanted you to be safe." I took a shaky step back, unwilling to take whatever she was offering. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The girl's eyes darkened, and for the first time I saw something else behind them. Something ancient, something far older than the child she appeared to be. The other students began to move, slow and methodical, forming a half circle around me. They held their hands at their sides, their expressions unreadable, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity. I tried to step backward, but I felt the wall at my back. "Look, it's okay. I won't break any more rules." The girl's expression softened, almost pitying. "It's not that simple." And then, without warning, she unwrapped the bundle in her hands. Inside was a small wooden figure, crudely carved and twisted, its features just barely resembling a human form. But it wasn't the doll itself that terrified me. It was the fact that it looked exactly like me. The figure's face was painted with a dark smudge where the mouth should be, its eyes hollow and empty. I felt a wave of nausea as I stared at it, and the room seemed to close in, the walls pressing closer. The children even moved closer, their eyes fixed on the doll as though waiting for it to do something. And then slowly, the girl held up the doll facing me and twisted its head. A searing pain shot through my skull, blinding and sharp, like ice pressing into my temples. I clutched my head, doubling over, barely able to keep myself upright. The room spun, and my vision blurred. It felt like my very thoughts were being pulled apart, like strings unraveling in my mind. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was closed, my voice gone. I was trapped in my own silence, the agony radiating through every nerve. The children's voices began to echo in my ears, distorted and overlapping, their words merging into a single, relentless chant. One mistake is all it takes. I could feel the weight of their stares pressing in on me. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't do it. I was frozen. The pain in my head got worse, and I could feel something pulling at me. It was suffocating. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the pain stopped. I collapsed to my knees, my vision swimming as I struggled to regain control when I looked up. The children were still watching me, their expressions blank, but their eyes seemed different. They were sharper, more focused, as if they were studying me, waiting to see what I'd do next. The girl with the doll knelt down in front of me, her face inches from mine. "You have to stay here now," she said softly. I tried to shake my head, to protest, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, my body numb. I could feel the pull of the doll, the way it seemed to reach inside me, like it was anchoring itself to my very soul. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day, but none of the students moved. They stood there watching me, as if waiting for something. And then slowly, they began to file out of the room, one by one, their faces expressionless, their steps eerily synchronized. The girl was the last to leave, pausing at the door to look back at me one final time. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Lee. We'll try to be nice." When the last of them left, I staggered to my feet, clutching the desk for support. I glanced around the room, my heart pounding, my heart racing. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, but I could still feel the doll's presence. I knew deep down that something had changed, that I'd left something behind, or that something had latched onto me, pulling me into a world I couldn't escape. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the empty classroom, the desks arranged in their neat rows, the faint scratches on the floorboards barely visible in the dim light. It looked ordinary, but I knew better. Months have passed since then, maybe years. I don't know anymore. But every day is kind of the same. I came in, follow the rules, teach the lessons, and ignore the strangeness of it all. I see the doll on my desk watching me with those empty eyes, its head twisted at an odd angle, and I always feel the pull of it. The rules have become second nature. I avoid the clock between 2:11 and 2:13. I ignore the scratching from below, whatever the hell that is, the knocking at the door, children's strange looks. I've got to know the kids more, actually. Some are very scary, but most of them aren't that bad. They do like to learn. They always pay attention. They actually even remembered my birthday and got me a special cake. It was really good, actually. It tasted like strawberries and memories. I do wish I could leave, though, or at the very least, have the summers off. Every morning I wake up knowing I have to go back to that room. I've become a part of the rules, a fixture there. And no matter how much I want to, I know that I can never leave. I was never so naive to think that our hobby wasn't extremely dangerous. In fact, deep down, I'd settled on the prospect of it killing me one day. But I would have never guessed it would be like this. After being nearly lost on the dusty, untraveled roads of Death Valley for hours, we finally came across signs of civilization, some little unincorporated town, not our destination. But it's a place with a name, somewhere we can point at the atlas to get our bearings. It was my fault for making Jim the navigator anyways. It's not that he's bad with directions, it's that he's bad at relaying the information to me, the driver. He'll read ahead on the atlas to himself, and then just watch out the windows as you pass turnoff after turnoff. Short attention. No, doing what we do, you need to have a good sense of direction. When you find yourself in a spaghetti bowl of tunnels 900 feet beneath the earth, you can't afford not to. We first started exploring abandoned mines when we were kids. Jim's folks owned property that had one on it. It wasn't a big one. It only went about 40 feet and collapsed beyond that. Nonetheless, we'd spend all day in that hole. Since then, we've explored about 17 other mines for nothing other than the thrill and the history. I'm going to stop at this station, get something to drink, stretch my legs a bit before we head to the mine, I said. As soon as we got out, Jim was already snapping pictures of his brand new '96 Ford Bronco against the desert backdrop. He always had that Polaroid camera around his neck to document our travels. A bell on a chain jingled as I pushed the door to the nameless gas station open. They didn't have many options as far as drinks went. I figured they probably only stocked with a few people that inhabited this place to drink, since there's no way anyone from out of town was going to find this place, except us. I got a bottle of water. When I got back outside, Jim was staring at the window of the store with a stern but concerned look on his face, like he was trying to solve a riddle. "What's up?" I asked, turning to see what he was staring at. "Missing posters. Most of them are kids, but some adults, 12 of them." "How the hell do you have this many missing people in a town of, 800 people?" Jim said, "I don't know. And why do you think they need these posters? You think everybody in town would know about this?" I stepped closer to the posters to read the details. "Missing from Mahogany Flat Campground. Last seen Wild Rose Campground. Abandoned RV found on Nevada State Road 160. They're from all over the area, not just this town. Mostly campers. That's crazy. There's so many. Serial killer, maybe?" Jim asked. "Maybe. I don't know. Campers get lost all the time." I shrugged. "Well, let's get going. We got to find the mine while it's still light out." I started walking back to the Bronco. As Jim lifted his Polaroid and snapped a picture of the window, he looked up and down from the phone to the window for a few seconds more before pulling himself away from it. Pulling off of one unpaved road onto another more primitive one, we figured we were nearly there. Of course, we didn't get the property owner's permission to come poke around out here. People are too afraid of liability these days. It did pose a risk of wasting time, however. We wouldn't know until we arrived if the mine had been sealed off, collapsed, or if it even existed in the first place. We only learn about these things from rumors, researching old mining businesses, etc. This one was a silver mine that we found pictures of in a friend's great-great-grandfather's personal effects. The guy's living relative told us where we might be able to find it, within several miles of desert, that is. It wasn't long before we saw the head frame standing like a skeleton on the hill. Head frames are used on a specific type of mine, a vertical shaft. That means it drops straight down, sometimes 100 feet, sometimes 500 feet. This one is 900 feet, according to the old man's journal. We discussed the possibility of there being a back at it, another entrance at the bottom, on the side of the mountain. But they were always a pain in the ass to find and usually collapsed when he found them. Here we already had a beacon showing us right where to go. We parked the Bronco behind a barely standing hoist building, so it wouldn't be seen from the road at the base of the mountain, and began unloading our gear. Quite the amateur loadout, really. Some climbing rope, flashlights, headlamps and helmets. The Polaroid. Check it out. It's a silver mine, Jim said. As he pointed to the hoist building's door, the word sliver was scratched into it. Well, too bad they weren't mine and glad, or else they may have been able to afford an education. We wasted almost no time before we were stopped up and heading down the cramped manway, the series of ladders and narrow platforms that followed the shaft all the way to the bottom. We climbed for what seemed like an eternity, passing all kinds of dead animals that had fallen into the shaft. Stepping off into the first level, we figured we were maybe 500 feet deep. Jim looked over the edge of the cage shaft to see how much further he couldn't see the bottom. I hated when he leaned over shit like that. We weren't even on solid ground yet. We were still on the 100-plus-year-old platform. We looked around for a bit on the first level. Sedimentary lines streaked across the walls, pockmarked with pickaxe strikes. The ceiling is just high enough that you don't hit your head on the visibly strained supporting beams. It's easy to forget that there's hundreds of thousands of tons of rock and earth bearing down on these old beams at all times. A bent or broken beam is always a chilling reminder. Old crates that probably contained dynamite at one time, an old bottle, and a pack of cigarettes that hadn't been sold in 30 years. Some spray, paint on the wall, said Nick 78. Let's keep going down, I said. Farther and farther down we went. The wood that made up the manway was more sturdy the farther down, to the elements not being able to reach it. But that's not to say it was safe. This whole thing could come down at any second for no other reason than we spoke too loud or one of us sneezed or something. Damn near anything could cause a collapse. We passed another level, but we decided to just press on down another level. We found a newspaper sitting on a crate. The date is 1934. The mine could still have been active then, but it was a good sign to find these less disturbed the farther down we went. Another level, and the ladder is gone. Damn, there's still more down there. Jim said in a harsh whisper. Way more than 900 feet. Maybe we can find a chute and squeeze through it, I suggested. This was not only risky, but also terrifying. Chutes were often barely just big enough for a single person, and there isn't always a way to tell if the bottom of the chute is clear, or if the miners just left a bunch of shit in it. Plus, we didn't even know if we'd find a chute. There'd only be one if there was a back added to this place. We got off on that level and looked around. Mine carts, pickaxes, crates that still had dynamite. This place looks like it hadn't been touched since they closed it down. It didn't take long before we found chutes that led into the darkness below. I'll go grab a crate to give us a leg up, I said. Yeah, well, stay away from that one that still has dynamite. You know that old shit'll go up if you just look at it wrong, Jim said. Yeah, I'm the one that told you that. Jim laughed as I went in search of a crate. When I got back, he was holding something. A necklace, like costume jewelry. What the hell is that? I asked. I found it hung up on one of those chutes, he said, holding it up to his headlamp. Looks like something a child would wear. He looked closer at it, and then his eyes got wide. He took his backpack off and started rummaging around for something. He pulled out a Polaroid picture and studied it. What? I asked, growing impatient. One of those kids from the missing poster, he said as he held up the photo to my face. That girl there, she's wearing this necklace. My throat squeezed, no doubt to keep my heart from jumping out of it. You think she's down there? Maybe. I don't know. Jim's voice became panicked. Well, there's no way she made it down here by herself. Some freaking psychopath had to drug her down here and tossed her down the chute. Shit, it was becoming harder to keep my voice down. What do we do? Report it, Jim said, his eyes darting wildly around the man-made cavern. They'll know we were down here trespassing, man. I mean, that necklace could have belonged to anyone. It's not like we found our body. I just stood there, eyeing the chute. Oh no. No, he said, shaking his head. I'm not going down there knowing there's a pretty good chance I'm going to find a little girl's body. We could give her family closure, I suggested. Jim shifted his weight to one foot and put his hand on his hip, still holding the necklace. He looked down at the photo in his other hand and let out a big sigh. Oh shit, stepping up onto the old crate, I peered into the chute. The darkness quickly consumed the light from both my handheld flashlight and headlamp, as if it were a black hole. The longer I looked, the more it felt like it was sucking me in. The darkness seemed to creep up the sides of the chute. It let me know that it wasn't going to let me escape if it got a hold of me. Shaken, I stepped back down. There's no air moving through here, I said, taking more than a few steps back from the chute. That means there's probably not a way out down there. What if we tied a rope around the mouth of a chute so we could climb back out? Jim suggested. I nodded. That was the only way I'd agreed to this after staring down its throat. After securing the rope, we looked at each other as if to say, after you. But after seeing Jim's appalling face, I decided that I would go first. I strapped myself in. took my backpack off for Jim to slide down after me, and I raised my legs into the chute. They disappeared into the black. "I'll be in right after you," Jim said. His face hadn't regained any color and now started to look like he even aged in the short time that I took to strap myself in. I let my body slide down a few more feet as I felt the walls of the chute wrap around me. My shoulders barely made it inside, and there was no room to raise my head to look down where I was going. This is insane, I thought, but I also asked myself what we were so afraid of. We'd done this more than a few times. This wouldn't even be the first chute we'd slid down. I suppose seeing a dead body wasn't exactly something that either of us were eager to do. But I couldn't just leave her down here with her parents left forever wondering what happened. Plus, with a body, they can do forensics. And maybe even catch the guy that did this. Still, though, I was afraid. If not for the slope of the chute, I would have been unable to move. It was irrational. There was no logic behind it. I've been in some sketchy mines. I've dropped my only flashlight hundreds of feet into pitch black, and I've narrowly avoided a cave-in. But I was afraid my breathing became shaky, and my heart pounded so hard that it was thumping on the walls of the chute. I slid deeper. I felt that it was never going to end. Although the temperature was now a constant 54 degrees, I was sweating profusely. I may have even begun to cry a little. I've been sliding down for so long that I just wanted it to end. Let me fall out onto a dead little girl. I don't care. Just make it stop. And then it did. Although it was the goal to reach the bottom and search for anything that may either confirm our suspicions or refute them as overactive imagination, I found myself unwilling to examine my surroundings for fear of what the oppressive dark had been hiding down here, to finally be illuminated by a single weak headlamp. I opened my eyes. There was nothing here. There's no little body, no pile of corpses, no blood, bones, or gore. Well, that's it then, I thought. I'll just climb up so we can go home. But was it not our intention to come down here anyway? Wasn't it the plan to find a chute to continue our exploration into the very deepest parts of this mine? It wasn't until that necklace that this mine seemed to change, as if that necklace had awakened the mine. Or more accurately, awakened the darkness. All around me, the darkness seemed to be sentient, fingers of the black void reaching in from the edges of my headlamp beam, closing in, getting darker. My headlamp battery was running out. I turned back to the chute to yell for Jim to slide my backpack down. It had extra batteries and my handheld flashlight. I peered into the chute and yelled, but nothing. I waited to see if I could catch a glimpse of a tiny pinpoint of light to indicate that Jim was looking down at me. But there was nothing, just black. I called out again and again. No response. At some point, I felt as though I weren't calling Jim anymore, but rather asking the dark, pleading with it. Just when I thought the blood in my body would surely begin to dry up, I heard something coming down the chute. The sound of nylon rubbing against smooth would increase in pitch as it gained speed through the long tunnel before flying into my open arms. I opened the backpack to find that it only contained a Polaroid camera and some extra climbing clips, among a few other things. This was Jim's pack. Mine had extra batteries and Jim's had the rope, which was being used as my safety line back. Another sliding noise. The rope began gathering at my feet. That was it. There's no way back up the chute. It was far too narrow and steep to climb. It was going to be difficult even with a rope. But now using the chute was impossible. I yelled again for Jim, screamed. Nothing. What was happening? Had Jim planned this all along? Had he planned on getting me somewhere I couldn't escape and just leaving me to die? All that bullshit about Nicholas. I ate it up and then all too willingly allowed myself to go first. What was his motivation? Why would he do this? If I ever make it out of this place, I'm going to strangle him and toss him down the chute. See how he likes it. No, I'd lost myself at that moment. For the moment, I'd forgotten who Jim even was, other than a target for my anger. Something must have happened to Jim. Never in a million years would he do something like this to me. Would he? I turned off my headlamp to conserve what little battery it had left. The darkness slammed shut on me. At that moment, I was enraged by it. As if the darkness was so powerful that I could actually feel it on my skin, I sat there in absolute black, trying to gather my thoughts. I was at a complete loss of what to do. There was a number ladder that connected this level to the main way of the upper levels, and there was no way up this chute. I had about 3 days left. I figured in 3 days I would die of dehydration. I stood up and began walking slowly, hand feeling along the cold stone wall, easing my foot out step by agonizing step. The absolute darkness made the space seem both smaller, more enclosed, but also more vast. I felt as if I reached my hand out. I wouldn't be able to feel the other side of the tunnel. Sometimes I could, but other times it was just cold and empty darkness. It was no use. The tunnels and walls just seemed to go on forever, and my heart raced with every unsure step that I took. The ground was becoming less even, and debris seemed to have become more prevalent, easing my foot more carefully. I traced out a ledge in front of me. I kicked some rocks in. It seemed to only be a few feet deep. And then the smell hit me. It was a familiar smell, but one that I've never come across deep in a mine, like Old Death's stale, mummified carcasses, long dead and dried up, isolated from any natural means of returning its flesh to the earth. And it was coming from beyond the ledge before me. My knees began to give, as if my body was physically trying to keep me from going forward. I felt dizzy, intoxicated by the disorienting darkness made worse by that fetid stench. I had to turn my headlamp on, if only for a few seconds. I had to see what that smell was. Clicked it on. The dying light was so dim, it seemed as though I was looking through smoke. But I could see them. Bodies. Human bodies, dismembered in various ways and strewn across the pit. Skull fragments littered the tunnel from where I came, like dead leaves on a forest floor. Dried, gray skin stretched across silently shrieking skulls, each having an expression of absolute terror. I tried to back away, but my mind was breaking. Messages were getting mixed up. My body didn't know whether to run or stay put because I knew there was nowhere to go. I fell on my ass and I continued to scoot away from the pit, sliding on broken skeletons as I did. I backed myself up against a wall, and I put my face into my hands. My sobs turned into screams, and then into wretched groans echoing off the walls of this hell. I pulled myself to my feet and turned away from the pit to find a different route. I kept my headlamp on. I couldn't stand the chance of not being able to see, and I'd be able to move faster, but it did little to help my disorientation. Nothing looked the same upon a second glance. Parts of the stone walls seemed to move in the beam of my dim light. There were also artifacts here that I would have been thrilled about had the circumstances been different. Tools, tables, carts. Carts. If there are carts, there must have been rails leading back to the main shaft. The rails seem to be gone now, probably pulled up when they closed the mine, but if I look closely at the ground, I can see the grooves where they once were. I began to follow. My headlamp seemed to dim with every step I took as I traced along the grooves. Eventually, I had to feel them with my feet. I'd silently agreed with myself that if I couldn't make it up or down from the main shaft, I'd just jump. I continued to slide one foot along and step with the other until I noticed that my step had become louder. I stopped, and there was another step behind me. I slid and stepped, then stopped. Another step fell behind me after I'd stopped. Someone's in here with me, and they're following me. I froze. The once dead silence of a mine was now filled with the whooshing and thumping of blood and heartbeats. Every creak of my joints echoed off the walls now that my safety depended on my hearing rather than my sight. Try as I might to steady my shuddering breathing, there was nothing I could do to dampen the sound of my nearly being alive. My headlamp had dimmed to the brightness of a lit cigarette, but instinct overrode logic and turned to face the direction that the sound of a footfall had come from, as you'd expect. I saw nothing at first. After several minutes, I took one more step, and then there was no doubt someone or something had stepped on a skull fragment several feet behind me, causing a snap to ring out. It might as well have been a gunshot. It seemed just as loud. My head snapped again to look behind me, and that's when I saw two dim orange lights. Reflections like those of an alligator's eyes peering out from a black swamp or a tiger's as it lies in ambush while the rest of its body remain invisible. perfectly camouflaged in the grasslands and darkness of a savanna night. Those two orange hints of eyes were all I could see, only reflecting back the same magnitude of light that my dying headlamp could provide. They were still, motionless, soulless, and unblinking, surrounded in pitch black. The dark was alive. It was watching me, following me. For a moment, my propensity for logic and reasoning offered an interpretation of the events transpiring. Perhaps Jim had found another way down, and he was panicked as well, seeing my own dim orange glow. I should call out to him, I thought. "Jim," I whispered. "Is that you?" Instantly shocked by my own words, their spontaneity frightened me in the absence of any other sound. How could I have just done that? I thought. Despite all the reasoning I'd done prior, I felt that I hadn't thought this through. And then the darkness responded. "Jim. Jim, is that you, Jim? Is that you, Jim? Is that you?" The voice seemed to be wholly unnatural, and I almost lost it for a second. I was several 100 feet below the Earth's surface in pitch blackness, surrounded by hundreds of dismembered bodies in an enclosed space, shared with something terrifying, and nobody even knew I was down here. I would die if I didn't act soon. "Jim, Jim, is that you, Jim?" The voice continued. I ran, no longer concerned with the direction of my tracks. I resolved running anywhere walls would allow, arms stretched out in front of me. I ran blind, with footsteps following behind me. The footsteps now sounded like a four-legged creature, growing closer, closing in. This was it, I thought. Glancing back yielded nothing, not even the orange reflections. My headlamp had completely died, and I would be soon to follow. I succumbed to hopelessness. There was nothing I could do. There was nowhere I could turn, cut and bruised from running into walls, dazed from brain impacts, from overhead beams, sick from the smell and unable to see. I was only prolonging my own demise and torturing myself with a constant rise and fall of hope. I stopped running, and so did the other footsteps. Out of breath and dizzy, I struggled to understand what was happening. The termination of the pursuit was completely unexpected. And then, surprised by my own resourcefulness, I remembered I was in possession of Jim's camera. The camera had a flash on it. I could see once and for all my surroundings, options for escape, and most importantly, the identity of my pursuer. Slowly, I pulled one arm through the strap of Jim's backpack and quietly swung it out in front of me. Following the length of the zipper, I found a tab and began to open it. There was a quick scatter of debris from black, as if the darkness flinched at the sound of the zipper. I froze, but no sooner had the noise started. It stopped. I reached my hand in and grabbed the camera, looped its strap around my neck, and returned the backpack, hand shaking and a trembling finger on the button. I raised the camera to my chest, aimed it into the void, and a flashing blind light went throughout the tunnel. In an instant, everything was bright white, and the image appeared. Sharp shadows cast from jagged protrusions in the walls, reaching toward the center of the tunnel for about 20 feet before it curved out of sight. It stood on all fours. Its body was human in appearance, but its limbs were anything but. Its hind legs stood on a tall heel much like most four-legged, ground-dwelling mammals, and its arms were long, like that of a bat wing, but without the membranous skin that enabled flight. Both feet and hands had long, bony toes and fingers. And its face. Oh God, its face. A thin neck connected to an abnormally large chin. High cheekbones held its two glowing eyes like pedestals. It shrieked in the preceding darkness of a flash, and I heard it retreat back into the depth of the tunnel. During the flash, I could see that just to the right of where the creature had stood, there was a passage that led to a dark area with a narrow wooden platform. That must be the manway for the main shaft, I thought. I took advantage of the moment the creature had offered me, and I booked it to the platform. I took the picture out of the camera's ejection slot and shoved it in my back pocket, then snapped another picture. It turned out it was the main shaft, but there were no ladders leading up. They seemed to all have been broken away. Platforms, too. I turned my attention downward, and I could see down about 25 feet. There was a tunnel that was glowing with the faint light of the setting sun, and at it there was a back entrance after all. I took another picture. In the flash, I could see that there was nothing below the platform I was standing on. There was no way down but to jump. So I did. Landing on my side, arms wrapped around my head, I immediately felt immense pain throughout my body. My ribs on the side that I landed on felt like they'd broken and shifted inward, making breathing difficult. My right leg was limp at the shin, and my right forearm had a jagged protrusion that I suspected to be bone. I pulled myself to stand on one foot and began to hop toward the illuminated tunnel, bracing myself on the wall as I went. As I entered the tunnel, the faint evening light was almost blinding, but nonetheless, I could finally see outside. The desert air cradled my face like warm, welcoming hands, cooling the streaks of tears and sweat. I came upon a dead and withered mesquite tree and broke a branch off to use as a crutch. Walking still proved difficult from my inability to brace myself using my broken arm. The protrusion was indeed bone. I began walking best that I could up the hill. From this angle, it looked totally unrecognizable as the point that Jim and I began our journey. After about 2.5 hours of walking, night had fallen, and I could barely make out what appeared to be a black scaffolding, like voids in the stars behind the top of the hill. It must be the head frame, I thought. Almost home. I continued hopping, sliding, and tripping up the hill. Every once in a while, I'd hear pebbles falling from the incline. A rabbit would occasionally jump out from behind a bush. Any other time, this environment, the plants, animals, the gentle breeze, the beautiful sky, it would have given me a feeling of peace and tranquility. But I was losing my nerve. I couldn't shake the sense that I was still being followed. Bright as the cosmic specks of light were, they did little to allow me the ability to make out what might have been that creature's white body against the sand behind me. Things moved all around me, and noises never seemed to have a source. I caught glimpses of movement out of the margins of my vision, but when I looked, nothing there. I made it up the last ledge of the hill that hid the mine in its belly. I made it. I was nearly crawling at that point. Jim's Bronco seemed to remain the same distance, no matter how much ground I covered. I was slowly passing the head frame when I was blinded by light, and caught off guard by a loud crunch of gravel and the gentle rumble of a truck engine. I put my hand up to shield my eyes and then collapsed. "Hey there, are you all right?" A man's voice said as he approached me. He was silhouetted in front of his headlights. I couldn't answer. I was too weak and thirsty. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" The man asked before taking a closer look to see that I was wearing a climbing harness and headlamp. "You were in the mine, weren't you?" I nodded. You must be crazy, jumping off into there by yourself at night." No, not alone, Jim. Is there someone else in there?" he asked. I nodded again. But if there's something else. There's something in there. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the picture. The man reached down, took the picture, and studied it for a moment. "Does anyone know you're out here?" I looked at him to see if I could make out any expression that would indicate what he intended by the question. I couldn't. He put the picture in his pocket and knelt down in front of me. "That fong's got a name." He looked and nodded at the valley I just trekked from. "It's Silver." No sooner had he said that, I felt my whole body being jerked away, as if I'd been tied by the ankles to a bull running full brake. The beams of the truck's headlights got smaller, and the man stood up and watched as I was dragged away, kicking, flailing, and screaming. The metal bars of the head frame flew past my head, reaching for them to no avail. And then I was in the shaft, violently grasping the air and the earth and desperately shrieking, watching as the window to the sky got farther and farther away, darker and darker, until finally it went black. My name's Danny. I work at the campus radio station tucked inside the old media building at Westbrook College. It's not a fancy place, just a couple of small studios, some outdated equipment, and a break room with a microwave that smells like burnt popcorn, no matter how many times you try to clean it. But it's home and away. I graduated from here a few years back. I always figured I'd move on to something bigger. Maybe a job in commercial radio or even TV. But I guess I got attached. Westbrook has this way of pulling you back in. Or maybe I never really wanted to leave in the first place. My job is simple. I'm one of the tech guys. I help set up mics and cameras for the broadcasting students, keep the soundboard running, and make sure nothing catches fire. That's about it. I can kick my feet up in the middle of the day and read a book, grab coffee with a coworker, and even leave early if there's nothing going on. Doesn't pay much, but it's enough. My rent's covered, I've got an emergency fund, and I throw a little into my retirement account every month. I don't need much. On weekends, I go hiking with my buddies. In the evenings, I play video games or watch old horror movies. And yeah, it's a good life. A quiet life. The station itself isn't much to look at. It's in the basement level of the media building, down a hallway that always smells a little like damp carpet. There are 2 recording booths, a control room, and a storage closet full of cables and ancient equipment nobody uses anymore. The main studio has a long desk with 3 microphones, a computer for running the station's playlist, and a big red on air sign that lights up whenever someone's broadcasting live. It's a small operation, but it runs like a well-oiled machine. We air pre-recorded shows from students, local indie music, and the occasional live broadcast. Most of the time, though, it's just me in the control room listening to the same cycle of music and making sure nothing breaks. I have a few regulars who drop by. There's Jenna, one of the student DJs who hosts a late-night show called Night Sounds. She plays weird ambient music and takes anonymous calls. Then there's Sam, my coworker, and one of the other tech guys. He's been here longer than me. We usually grab coffee together around 10 most nights. The station runs on autopilot. The playlist shuffles through the usual mix of student-selected tracks, and the control board's lights blink in their steady, familiar rhythm. It's peaceful, really. The station's been here since the college was founded. Back then, it was meant to be a training ground for journalism students, a place to practice before heading off to bigger networks. And in a way, it still is. But over time, it became something more. People in town started listening in. It wasn't just students running shows anymore. Professors, locals, even alumni would come back to host segments. Some played music. Some told stories. Some just talked about whatever was on their minds. Now the station runs every day, morning to night. There's always something playing. Most of the town tunes in. Even if it's just background noise while they cook dinner or drive home from work, it's become part of Westbrook, woven into the daily routine. And I'm the one who keeps it running. It's not hard work. I make sure the equipment stays in one piece, check the levels, and load up the pre-recorded shows when needed. If something breaks, I fix it. If someone new comes in, I show them how things work. It's easy. But lately, well, something's changed. A new show spot has opened up, a frequency we didn't have before. That doesn't usually happen. The schedule has been the same for years, every slot filled, every hour accounted for. But then one day a gap appeared. A new frequency, like it has always been there. The higher-ups didn't ask questions. They just decided to fill it. And to keep the schedule running smoothly, they had to bring in extra help. And that's where you come in. Welcome to your first night on the job. I have a few rules for you to follow. The new slot runs from 3:13 a.m. to 4:02 a.m. That's right, just for those minutes. It's weird. Most radio slots are neat, clean blocks. 30 minutes, an hour, sometimes longer. But this one is exactly 49 minutes long. Not an hour, not a half an hour, 49. Nobody really questioned it. The station managers figured it was a good idea. A way to bring in more listeners, maybe. Westbrook has a lot of night workers, nurses, security guards, call center employees, students with late-night study sessions. They need something to listen to, too. The station's always looking for ways to reach more people. The way they saw it, it was a perfect fit. A late-night slot for the late-night crowd. But things have been strange since it started. The last guy quit. He didn't give a reason. Not really. Just came in one morning, dropped his key card on my desk, and left. No 2 weeks notice, no explanation. When I asked him what happened, he just shook his head and told me to find someone else. But he'd been acting weird before that. Always showed up on time, but he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sometimes there were red handprints on his arms or smudged onto his shirt like red paint. I asked him about it once. He just stared at me for a second, then rolled his sleeve down and changed the subject. Then you applied for the position when he left. I don't want to get ahead of myself and scare you off on your first night. Maybe the last guy just couldn't handle the hours. Not everyone's built for overnight work, you know. But just in case, I have a list of rules for you to follow. So grab a coffee and listen. Rule number 1. Don't follow the coordinates. It's normal for radio stations to get calls. That's part of the job. People like to interact. They request songs, ask for shout-outs, or just call in because they're bored during a night shift. It breaks up the routine, keeps things feeling a little more alive. You'll have a script. It's taped to the desk. Simple stuff, introductions, station identification, filler banner for when things get too quiet. Nothing complicated. You take the calls, read off whatever the station managers want you to read, keep things running smoothly. But sometimes a particular call comes in. It's not on the request line. It's not from a regular listener. It's an old man. He reads off a set of random numbers that don't make sense to anybody listening. 41498169. Then he hangs up. The numbers change every time. No one's ever gotten the same set twice. At first, the DJs treated it like a prank. They'd laugh it off, maybe make a joke about winning the lottery or guessing someone's birthday. They'd drop the call and move on with the show. No big deal. But the calls didn't stop. Every night, like clockwork, they came in. The same voice, the same slow delivery. A new set of numbers every time. The managers tried blocking the number, but it didn't matter. The calls always got through. I got curious and I started digging. At first, I just wanted to see if there was a pattern. Maybe the numbers repeated. Maybe it was some elaborate prank by a bored student with too much time on their hands. So I started writing them down: 423-67105340511182 every time the call came in. I jotted the numbers down in a notebook I kept under the desk. At first, it felt pointless. Just a habit, something to do to make the weirdness seem a little less weird. The managers told me to ignore the calls. Just drop them, they said. It's nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. After a while, I had pages of numbers, pages of something I didn't understand. They never repeated. Not once. And then I started plugging them into the internet. At first, I thought they'd lead to nothing. Just a bunch of random digits with no real meaning. Maybe an old landline number, an IP address, some hidden website filled with cryptic nonsense. Something explainable, something normal. But they weren't. They were coordinates. Longitude and latitude. I remember the first time I realized it. I typed one of the sets into Google Maps, half expecting an error message or some irrelevant location in the middle of the ocean. But it wasn't. It was a street corner in Boston. I didn't think much of it. And then I tried another. A forest clearing in Tennessee. Then another. Bridge in London. I kept going, clicking, searching. Each one led somewhere specific, a real place. And then I started seeing the news articles. Each coordinate lined up with a missing persons case. Different time periods, different parts of the world. Some from decades ago, some recent. Some well known, others just a footnote in old police reports, but all unsolved. All people who had vanished without a trace. I thought it had to be a coincidence. I mean, it had to be, right? But the more I looked, the worse it got. A set of numbers from last week pointed to a rest stop off a highway in Nevada. A woman disappeared there 3 months ago. Another led to an abandoned gas station in Portland, where a man was last seen in 1987. On another beach in Florida, a kid went missing in 2004. Dozens of them, maybe more. That's when I found the latest set of coordinates. At first, it didn't seem any different from the others, just another string of numbers, another pin on the map. But when I looked up, there was nothing. No news articles, no old reports, no case files buried in the back of some archive. Just a location. It led to an abandoned gas station off a Texas highway a few miles from here. And that was the first time I hesitated. Every other coordinate has story behind it, a name, a face. A brief summary of someone who disappeared. This one had nothing, just a spot on the map. But by now, I understood the pattern. I knew what it meant. Someone had gone missing there. They just hadn't been reported yet. I told myself to forget about it. Then the next night, the station ran a national missing persons report. We aired those sometimes. Part of an effort to spread awareness, keep the public informed. The anchors read off the details like they always did. Name, description, last known location. She was a college student driving through Texas on her way to meet friends in the next city over for spring break. She stopped at a local diner named Jerry's, then got back on the road. That was the last time anyone saw her. She never made it to her destination. Her last known location, the coordinates I'd plugged in the night before. I stared at the screen, barely listening as they moved on to the next story. My mind was stuck on the numbers and the voice reading them out over the phone, the slow, deliberate way he spoke. He'd given me her last known location before the news even broke, before the police had even made it public. That was the night I stopped looking. I closed the notebook, put it in the back of my desk drawer, and told myself I was done. So follow my advice. Don't ever follow the coordinates. Here's rule number 2. Ignore the dead DJ in the back room more than a decade ago. The station had one of the best DJs we'd ever seen. The guy with real talent. People loved him. His voice was smooth, his timing was perfect, and he had this way of making every listener feel like they were in on the joke. It didn't matter if he was talking about the weather, an upcoming concert, or some dumb story from his morning commute. He made it sound interesting. He had this rare gift, the kind he can't teach. Some people just know how to talk, how to hold a room, even when that room is made up of people scattered across 100 radios and car speakers. His slot was the most popular at the time. Every night he'd take calls, crack jokes, play music that fit the mood just right. Callers felt like they were talking to an old friend. In a way, they were. He had that effect on people. But it didn't last. He had a heart condition. Nothing too serious. Or at least that's what he thought. The doctors weren't sure what caused it, just that something wasn't right. His blood pressure was off. His heart rhythm was irregular. He went on medication, kept an eye on his health, but he didn't slow down. Then one night it happened. He was on air, right in the middle of a sentence. One moment he was laughing at something a caller said. The next he stopped, just went silent. The co-host covered for him, smoothed it over so, well, that most listeners didn't even notice anything was wrong. They got him to the hospital, but he didn't make it. The station lost one of its best that night. The thing is, though, he never left. The back rooms are where we keep all the old equipment and props. It's a mess back there. Rows of metal shelves stacked with cardboard boxes full of forgotten things. Costumes that smell like mothballs, cameras past their prime, stage lights, missing bulbs, tangled piles of wires that connect to who knows what. It's a graveyard for things the station doesn't use anymore but refuses to throw away. It's also where the dead DJ hangs out. Now, before you get any ideas, he doesn't look dead. He's not some zombified corpse, not a rotting thing crawling out of the walls. If you saw him, you'd think he was just another guy working late. Except he's not. You'll know it's him by the red jacket. That's the one thing that never changes. No matter when or where you see him, he's always wearing that same red jacket, the one he wore the night he died. He doesn't do much, just walks around like he's inspecting the place, looking at cameras facing corners like he's thinking about something. He never talks. If you see him, ignore him. Act like he's not there if he can, but sometimes on rare occasions, he'll try to talk to you. If that happens, make up an excuse. Say you gotta get back to work. Keep it short. Maybe give him a quick hello, then take what you need and leave. On my first night at the station, I didn't know about the DJ and the red jacket. I was still a student back then, going through college, just another kid trying to get experience in broadcasting. I volunteered to help set up for next week's set and was told to check the back rooms for props, and that's where I met him. He was standing near a shelf, flipping through an old record sleeve like he was considering playing it. I thought he was just another staff member, Maybe an alumnus coming back to help out. He looked normal, solid, real. We talked for a while, 5 minutes, maybe more. Hey kid, how are you? How are you doing? You look new around here. Hugh, it's your first night. Yeah, that's good. How? How are you doing? How are things? You got a girlfriend. Why? You look like you have a wife. I know how it is. He had this easy way of speaking, like someone who'd spent years behind a microphone. We talked about music, old records. The way vinyl had a warmth to it. That digital sound would never match. Hey, let me ask you something, he said. Now, what kind of music do you love? I told him. Classic rock. Classic rock. I knew. I knew you had good taste. Classic rock. That's the right answer, my friend. We laughed. I finished talking, but I didn't think anything of it. Then my friend called me from the hall. I glanced away for just a second, told him I'd be right back, and when I turned around, he was gone. I still remember that conversation like it happened yesterday. Every word of it, the way he nodded when I talked, the way he held that record in his hands. I didn't know I'd been speaking to a dead man until later. Now when I see him, I wave. I give him a nod if he's facing me, but I don't stop for conversation. He's not violent, never has been, but it's best not to take chances. My dad once told me that the dead like to linger when they have unfinished business. They cling to the places that mattered most to them, roaming around, searching for answers to questions they never got to ask. Some pass on their own. Others need help, and some just stay stuck between here and whatever comes next. The station managers tried to deal with him once. He popped up one night and scared the hell out of the owner's girlfriend. So they hired a guy named Sam Carver. Not a priest. Not the kind of person you'd expect to perform an exorcism. Just an old man who looked like Clint Eastwood and carried himself like he'd seen too much. He walked into the back rooms, stood there for a long time, and just started talking. Not chanting, not praying, just talking like he was catching up with an old neighbor. He stayed for about an hour. When he came back out, he shrugged and told us some souls aren't ready. Then he left. Didn't even charge a fee. After that, the ghost became quieter. We saw him less and less. Maybe he's finally starting to move on. Maybe not. Either way, if you ever run into him, just leave him be. Let him have his peace. Some people don't know they're dead. Alright, rule number 3. Always take the dead calls. Part of being a good DJ is knowing how to take calls and keep them going. We've already covered that. Some DJs are great at it. Natural entertainers who can turn even the most awkward caller into good radio, like the great Art Bell. Some are mediocre, stumbling through conversations, letting dead air stretch too long. If you're worried about fumbling, don't be. There's a script taped to the desk. Just follow it. I recommend drinking a Red Bull before your slot. You don't want to fall asleep on the mic. But there's something strange you should know about the calls you get. Something besides the numbers. The station calls them dead calls, and you must always pick up. It started years ago, back when the station first experimented with horror programming. It was supposed to be a one-time Halloween special. The idea was simple. Listeners would call in and share their scariest stories live on air. Ghost encounters, strange happenings, urban legends. Anything eerie was fair game. It was a hit. People loved it. Callers flooded the lines, eager to share ghost stories, urban legends, strange experiences they swore were real. Listeners couldn't get enough. The response was so strong that the station decided to expand it beyond Halloween. Soon enough, we were running horror story segments throughout the year. Westbrook just loves a good scare. We built a reputation on it. The station became known for its horror slots. People tuned in, expecting something eerie, something unsettling. It made good money. The managers leaned into it hard. And then the dead calls started happening. They started off small. Calls that appeared with no number on the station's dial, just blank. No caller ID, no area code, nothing. Just an incoming call from nowhere. First, we thought it was a technical issue, a bad line. Maybe someone called from a busted phone that couldn't display numbers properly. It happens sometimes. You pick up, there's a little interference, and then the voice comes through. Except these calls weren't normal. The DJ would answer like usual, ask who's calling, try to get a name, and then nothing. 5 seconds of pure silence. Now, usually callers are excited to be on the radio. They talk too loudly into the phone, their voices jumping with energy, eager to tell their stories. Some of them ramble. Some of them laugh too much. That's just how it is when people know they have an audience listening. But these calls were different. No excitement, no stammering or nervous laughter. Just silence. Like a bad connection. Like the person on the other end wasn't sure they were really being heard. Then finally they'd start speaking. It was never the same person twice. The names, the voices, they were always different. But the pattern was always the same. They were people the town had lost. They talked about how they died, where it happened. Sometimes, if it had been murder, they even named the person who did it. Other times, it wasn't gruesome at all. Just a quiet story about getting lost in the woods. And never coming back, about missing their family. About how much they wished they could see them one last time. They never stayed on the line for long. 55 seconds. Always the same. Then they'd hang up, and we'd never hear from them again. First, the town thought it was a cruel prank. We got angry calls from people asking why someone would pretend to be their missing spouse, their dead daughter, their brother who had drowned in the lake years ago. We tried tracing the calls, but there was nothing to trace. No number, no signal origin, just silence on the logs where a call should have been. Still, the horror segments continued, and so did the dead calls. The latest dead call was about a missing persons case from years ago. The girl on the line said her name was Tracy. She told us she'd gone missing on July 12th. I remembered that case. Everybody did. Back when I was in college, Tracy's face was everywhere. Milk cartons, store posters, news broadcasts. Her name was burned into the country's consciousness. She'd just been a kid when she disappeared, barely 16 one day. She was walking home from a friend's house. The next, she was gone. The whole country was looking for her. 4 months, her case dominated national news. Every new lead, every witness statement, every tip from some stranger claiming they saw a girl who might be Tracy. It was all covered, speculated on, dissected. People searched the forest, drained rivers, checked basements and abandoned buildings, but nothing ever came of it. Soon enough, the media moved on. That's just how life goes. The world doesn't stop turning just because you do. People get tired of hearing about the same tragedy, the same unanswered questions. Tracy's story faded like all the others before her, until the night of her dead call. It was a normal Friday night. The horror segment was winding down. Only a few minutes left before the DJ was set to close out the show. Then the call came through. No number, just blank. The DJ expected another scary story, maybe a local legend or some made-up ghost tale. But then a woman's voice came through. She described herself, her hair, her height. The last outfit she'd been wearing the day she vanished. Details that matched the posters from years ago. And then, most importantly, she described who killed her. It was Jacob Williamson, she said. 5'10", brown hair, green eyes. That was the night. The station became part of a police investigation. Everything changed after that call. The recording was pulled and analyzed. The police listened to it over and over, dissecting every word, every breath. The details she gave were too specific, too accurate to be anything but the truth. She went on to give even more details, and it led straight to a man the police had suspected for years, but could never pin anything on. They arrested him the next morning. Tracy's killer is in prison to this day. I don't know the full details. The police don't exactly hand out case files to random radio techs. All I know is that without that call, without Tracy speaking from wherever she was, he'd still be out there. So you take the dead calls, no matter how weird they get. No matter how much they unsettle you, you never ignore them. You never know who's on the other end. And if they've spent their last words reaching out to us, well, you better listen. And rule number 4. Always play the midnight track before you leave. People call it the midnight track, even when it's played at different times of the day. The name just stuck. Maybe because it feels like something that belongs to the late hours. Something meant for empty streets and quiet rooms. It's an old track. Nobody really knows where it came from. It's just always been part of the station. No artist credited, no official recording. Just a simple piece of music stored on an unlabeled vinyl, tucked away in the archives. It sounds like gospel, but not quite. It's soothing if you're into that kind of thing. But I've always found it, well, cleansing. That's a weird way to put it, I know. But it's the only way I can describe it. The trap doesn't just sound peaceful. It feels peaceful. Like something heavy lifts off your shoulders while it plays. Like the air settles in a way you didn't realize was off before. Maybe that's why the station has always used it to close out a shift. The rule is simple. Load it up beforehand, make sure it's ready, and play it at the end of your slot. A shift isn't done until the midnight record is played, and you're not allowed to leave until the final note. I guess you're wondering why. Why the midnight track exists. Why does it matter? Why you're not allowed to leave until the final note plays. I'll tell you. There's a story that floats around the station about where the midnight record came from. It's not in any official records. You won't find it in any old documents or station logs. But if you stick around long enough, you'll hear someone mention it. The story goes like this years ago. Long before Westbrook College bought the lot and built a campus on it, the station was run by a group of religious hippies, not the strict fire and brimstone type. These were the peace sign for Clover-type men, barefoot in the grass kind of believers. They were happy people, or at least they seemed that way. They wore colorful t-shirts, grew their hair out, and preached love and kindness. They started the station as a way to spread their version of the gospel. It wasn't just sermons. They played music, shared uplifting messages, gave advice to anyone who called in, the kind of things meant to make people feel safe, comforted. They wanted to build a community, one that stretched beyond their little patch of land. Some of them even moved out of the property. They built a small farm behind the station, just enough to sustain themselves. A vegetable patch, a few goats, a handful of tiny cabins where they lived. They didn't rely on anyone else. They made their own food, generated their own power. They even built their own cell tower. They wanted their message to reach farther, beyond the town, beyond the state. And for a while, everything was fine. But then something bad happened. They tried to reach out to something that wasn't human. Some say they were trying to talk to God himself, that they wanted something bigger, something beyond the songs and sermons. They wanted proof, a sign, a voice answering back. Whoever answered their call was not God. No one knows exactly what happened. The details are vague, twisted by time and retellings. But the story goes that after they built their tower, after they pushed their broadcast further and further into the unknown, something pushed back. Then, one by one, the people who ran the station started dying. It was never quick, never peaceful. A man fell from the top of the cell tower, his body found crumpled at the base like he'd been shoved. Another got locked inside his cabin, and it went up in flames. No one heard him scream. By the time they broke the door down, there was nothing left to save. There were others, more deaths, more strange accidents. A woman who walked into the woods one night and never came back. A man who drowned in a shallow pond behind the farm, even though he'd been a strong swimmer. One by one, they disappeared until there was no one left to run the station. Eventually, the land was sold. The buildings were torn down, the farm wiped away. Westbrook College bought the lot, refurbished the radio station, and turned it into what it is today. But the past didn't just vanish. The first people who walked through those doors found things left behind. Old albums filled with photos. Some of them were normal pictures of smiling faces, people laughing, hugging, and singing together in front of a microphone. But as they flipped through the pages, the photos changed. There were pictures of how those hippies died, but always out of frame. A broken arm here, a leg there, then blood seeping into the carpet. Finally, A picture of a goat staring right into the camera, its red eyes looking straight at you. At least that's what the alumni say. But the strangest thing wasn't the photos. It was the set of rules left on the table, taped onto it in plain view, as if someone had been desperate to make sure they were followed. The most important rule was circled in red ink. Always play the midnight record. Somebody had left a note alongside the rules. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, but the words were clear. It warned that bad things happen when the midnight record isn't played, that whatever's out there has its eye on the station, and that the song is the only thing keeping it at bay. At the bottom, one sentence was underlined twice before the note ended. Play it and pray. And those are all the rules you need to know. I have worked here for a long time. I graduated here on a Friday, and I started working on a Monday morning. Same station, same halls, same late nights spent in the glow of the control board. The callers come and go, voices drifting through the speakers, stories shared and forgotten. But the station always stays the same. And you've been listening this whole time, and it looks like your shift is about to start. Before you settle in, remember the rules. They're simple, but they matter. Don't follow the coordinates. The voice on the line will give you numbers slow and steady, like they mean something. And they do. But you don't want to know where they lead. You don't want to be the one to find out. Some things are better left undiscovered. Ignore the dead DJ in the back room. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, don't linger. Be polite, of course. Be quick. He was one of the best we ever had, after all. And maybe that's why he's still here. Maybe he just doesn't know how to leave. Take the dead calls. No matter how strange, no matter how impossible. You answer. You listen. 55 seconds. That's all they get. Some of them just want to talk. Some of them are trying to be found. Some of them are looking for justice. The least you can do is listen. And always, always play the midnight track. It's not just tradition. It's not just a closing song. It's what keeps the station standing. What keeps something else from stepping through. Play it and pray. Most people tune in for the music. They never notice the silence between the songs. They never wonder what might be listening back. That's good. That's safe. But now you know better. Alright, go on, cue up the next set. I've had a lot of regrets in finding that strange room in our new apartment. It's my biggest one. It was connected to our hallway by a single white door. There was fresh paint on the walls, still sticky. The thick carpet looked newly installed. Everything was a dull cream color, lit by a single bulb without a lampshade. No furniture of any kind. No windows either. It was quiet inside, warm. There's a faint metallic smell, too. I'd guess the room was 15 feet to each side, maybe 10 feet floor to ceiling. And of course, it wasn't there the day before. But I shouldn't start here. It began before all this. It began with a body. Everything I'm going to tell you happened in July of last year. We moved into the apartment on the 1st, just my son and I. It was in a terrible part of the city. Every street had abandoned buildings with boarded windows. There was trash on the sidewalks, angry faces in the windows, and sirens every night. You know, the kind of place I remember our first day there. I held my son's hand as we navigated around an unconscious drunk in the entrance, then up to the stone stairs, which smelled like vomit. It's okay, I told him as we reached the first floor, feeling him pull himself closer to me. It's not going to be forever, I said. The whole building was falling apart. The doors were rotting with water damage. Locks were broken. The walls were crumbling, and everything was covered in mold. The ground floor was deserted. I think it had been a furniture store, but the sign was too faded to be sure. There were 3 more levels, 2 apartments on each. We would be alone on the first floor. The second floor had single men staying on either side, an unemployed slob directly above us, and a skinny stoner who worked nights across from him. The top floor was also deserted. Judging by the dust on the stabs, it had been like that for quite a while. We reached the door of our new, hopefully temporary home. The paint was flaking off, and the lock had clearly been replaced more than once. I knocked and I gave my son a smile as we waited. He held my hand tighter and tried to smile back. 6 years old already, I thought. He had long, skinny limbs and dusty blonde hair, very quiet and shy around strangers. It felt like yesterday he was only learning to walk, stumbling into my arms. Our new landlord wrenched the door open, snapping me out of the memory. "Hey," he said, cigarette hanging from his mouth. "Come on in." We followed him into the poorly lit interior. 2 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom were connected to the living room by a narrow hallway. The kitchen, if you could call it that, was part of the living room. The floor had been stripped back to the floorboards, except the bathroom, which had cracked and worn tiles. The ceilings were discolored by what I guessed were years of cigarette smoke. The furniture was broken or stained or both. The windows were so dirty the sunlight had to fight its way through. "I'm Joseph, and this is my son Nathan," I said, looking around. "It was Kenny, wasn't it?" "Yeah," he said, stubbing out his cigarette in an ashtray. "Look, man, let's not screw around this place. It's a wreck and I don't have the cash to fix it. So for you, it'll be cheap as hell and available now. I'm guessing that's exactly what you're after, or you wouldn't even be here, right?" A rush of embarrassment struck me. My son was beside me, and this was the best I could offer him. It was my job to look after him, and this is where we ended up. "So, if you want it," he continued, "it's yours. What? What you see is what you get. Don't mess me around." "I won't mess you around, all right? Paperwork's on the table," he said. I didn't want to take it. I wanted to tell him no, that we could find somewhere better, that even on my terrible salary, I could find a way to do better for us. But it would have been a lie, and we both knew it. So I signed. Why were we there? How did we end up broke and desperate? It was the end of a 5-month battle to rebuild our lives, clearly with limited success. Nathan's mother, Natalie, my ex-wife, had walked out on us and took every penny we had. I doubted we'd ever see her again. Soon after that, I lost my job and struggled to get another. We were forced to leave our home and sell everything we had. So much of our lives had just vanished overnight. You wake up one morning, everything has changed. In those 2 decades I was with Natalie, I pulled away from friends and family, deleted contacts, and never made new ones. My grandparents had passed away, and then my parents in the last few years. Trying to make our lives work day to day filled my every waking moment. Gradually, everyone I knew had gone from my life until it was only the 3 of us. And then she left. I tried to treat it as a clean slate, a fresh start for both of us, but it was not that easy. You can leave people behind, but the memories aren't so easy to let go of. Natalie was always there in my head. Old arguments wound up when I closed my eyes. She had a drinking problem, and had for a long time. When you're alone with your thoughts, it's easy to take on blame, take on responsibility for every single problem. It's hard to be objective about these things when you're in the thick of it. She used to tell me when she was drunk that I'd be trapped in my dead-end ways forever, that I'd wasted both our lives. I didn't get angry. I'd grown up with my father's constant raging. I was terrified by the thought of turning out like him. So I tried to be patient and understanding, not bitter or resentful, and I failed. But with her gone, I found myself angrier than ever. I was cursing under my breath at all those memories, trying not to think of her at all. And that's where we were. The problems with a neighbor directly above us started that week. I think it was Tuesday night we first heard him shouting and stamping his feet. The next night, I saw the landlord coming into the building and heading up the stairs. A minute later, a shouting match blew up in the corridor above. Eventually, I heard the door close and Kenny leaving. The next night at 12:45 a.m., the screaming began. Doors were being slammed and what sounded like every item of furniture being smashed. And then the running started. A relentless hammering of feet on the floorboards for hours. It was insane. There were only a couple of rooms, I thought. Where the hell was he running? Just what? What was he doing? Lap after lap around the place. I might have let it go. For another day or something, at least, just to avoid the inevitable confrontation and stress. But it woke Nathan. Having my son scared awake was too much. I picked up my phone to call the police when it finally just stopped. Silence at last. The faint sounds of the city at night drifted back into hearing. To hell with it, I thought. It's 3 a.m. and I'll deal with it in the morning. I told myself I would go to his door, give him a chance to explain and apologize. If not, fine, I'd call the police and tell the landlord. Unlikely they could do anything, but what else could I do? The next morning, I got Nathan ready for school and then asked him to wait 5 minutes while I went upstairs as I climbed the steps. I heard a knock ahead of me. The landlord was already there, banging on the door and looking real pissed. "This guy wake you up too?" he asked. "I got people phoning me at 2 o'clock in the damn morning about him." "I am sick of this," he said. "Yeah, he did," I replied. "He woke up my son." Kenny didn't seem to actually be listening to me. He started kicking the door. "Screw him. I know he's in there," he muttered, pulling a ring of keys from his coat. I was about to make an excuse to escape back downstairs when the door swung open and we both saw what was inside. The apartment was trashed, every chair broken, the TV face down, every item pulled from drawers and cupboards and just thrown around, and in the center of it all, what had once been the tenant. His bloated gray corpse lay on its side, one arm stretching towards us. There was a ring of stained carpet around him. He looked as if he'd been dead for months. I saw a fly crawling on his lips, and I realized I was holding my breath. And then the smell hit us. Pushed out by the summer heat, nausea washed through me, and I grabbed the door frame to steady myself. I wasn't the only one affected by it. I realized Kenny threw up against the wall behind me. As I sucked in a breath, I looked down and I saw my foot inside the door, just an inch over the threshold. It felt wrong for some reason. I can't. Hard to describe. I pulled it back like I'd been stung. The burning acidic odor began to fill the hallway. "More of this crap," Kenny said. "I can't take any more of this. I'll be finished." He turned away and raised his phone to his ear. I heard him calling for police and an ambulance, but his voice sounded miles away. I went back downstairs to my son. More of this crap, I thought. What the hell did that mean? I had to give a statement to the police, as basic as it was. It made Nate late for school, but I was off that day, so I didn't miss work. The landlord's words had stuck with me, so as soon as I was alone, I searched for our building online. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The previous year, a single mother and her daughter had gone missing from their apartment on the top floor. The guy who had lived opposite, an unemployed teacher, had been found unconscious in their home. He never confessed, and they never found the bodies. I kept searching, and I found out he died before the trial. Natural causes. This was a nightmare. I should have checked this before we moved here. I let Nathan down, bringing him here. I had to do better. The photograph of the missing woman and her daughter in the article stared back at me. I'll find us somewhere else, I told myself. I'll get more shifts at work and I'll find us somewhere else. I remember dinner with Nathan that night. Fish fingers and some canned vegetables. Not exactly gourmet cuisine, but it was all we could afford. The conversation. It went like this pretty much every night. "Can you try to close your mouth when you're eating, Nathan?" I said across the table. "Oh, sorry," he mumbled out. "I genuinely think I've told you 1,000 times." "I'm sorry," he said again, looking down at his plate. "And stop saying you're sorry about every little thing, please." I'm okay." He stared down at his food in silence, on the edge of being upset. I should apologize, I thought. I was too hard on him. Always too hard on him. "Hey," I launched a forced smile. "Just try your best, all right? Now tell me about your day. Come on, don't go into a funk." "I'm not." Okay, you're not in a funk. What did you get up to today? How was school?" I tried to keep the conversation going. "Fine, just fine." It was like drawing blood from a stone. Always was. Was I like that at his age? I was probably worse, I thought. Dad. Nathan looked up at me. "Yeah. Do you miss Mom?" I paused. "Think about how he feels," I told myself. "Don't be angry with him. If you get angry right now, that's your fault. not his. Then don't lie to him. Not ever. Do you miss her? I asked. Yeah, he was crying. I saw silently crying, hiding his face. My first reaction was I can't handle more of this. Not tonight. And then I thought, no, for God's sake, what is wrong with me? He's a little boy crying because he misses his mom, and I'm his dad. I should stop being such an asshole. He doesn't understand what she was like. He just misses his mom. I went around the table, and I pulled him into an awkward hug. He slumped into my arms. I remember thinking how small he seemed again, as if he was shrinking with every sob. It's okay, I told him. I tried to sit him back on the chair as I spoke, but his arms were tight around me. I won't leave you, okay? Not ever, I promise. He didn't reply, but the crying stopped. It wasn't what he wanted to hear. I knew that. He wanted me to tell him his mother was coming back, but I wasn't going to lie to him. Come on now, crying's not going to help. I tried to sound as positive as I could. Chin up. Wipe your face. He rubbed his nose on his sleeve, and I went back to my seat as I spoke. Let's change the subject, I thought. So you hardly told me anything about school today. What's been happening? It took a minute to get him talking, but he told me a little about his friends and his teacher. We were just finishing up when we were interrupted by noises from the floor above. Voices. Something heavy being moved across the floor. Police, I guessed. Or whoever it was that dealt with removing bodies. What happened upstairs? He asked. Oh, grown-up stuff, I said, trying to act casual. Nothing, Nate. Yeah, please stop saying, oh, you heard me. I know you heard me. Sorry, he said back. Nate, forget it. Just finish your dinner. I was too impatient with him, and I hated myself for it. All the stress in my life. He didn't cause any of it, if anything. He was the only bright spot I had. Being tired and irritable was not an excuse. After dinner, I could hear him playing in his room as I washed the dishes. I should go in, I thought. Spend some real time with him. Maybe play with his toys together. A board game, hide and seek. I don't know anything. I'll regret not doing it when I'm an old man. A few more years, and he won't even want to anymore. Won't want to play, pretend, or have me read to him. He'll have new friends and 1,000 other things I can't be a part of. I wanted to go to him. I did, but I was exhausted. I was always exhausted. Trying to get him to sleep in his own room for a full night took years, I told myself. So I should savor a bit of peace and quiet. Nathan always hated being away from me and his mother, even if it was just a different room. I just hated being alone. He's a people person, I thought. Always will be. Nothing like his dad. My eyes were heavy, body aching. Even with every window open, the summer heat was draining. The TV chatted away, and I sank under the couch, telling myself he was fine on his own. The sound of my son getting ready for school woke me up. I hardly remembered putting him to bed, never mind going on my own. Weak sunlight filtered through the dirty windows as I reached for my phone to check the time. Dad? I heard him push my door open and peek inside. Yeah, I'm up. I'm coming. Dad. There was an urgency in his voice. Yeah, I said. I'm coming. There's a new door. I sat up, trying to clear my head. What the hell was he talking about? I pulled on a shirt and I stepped out into the hall where he was standing, and there was indeed a new door. See, he said. I didn't know what to say. Was this, I don't know, some kind of joke? How could I have missed this? I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. This was impossible. Nate watched me as I reached out for the handle and pulled the door open. And there it was, the new room. I stepped inside and I turned in a slow circle. My mind was working overtime and coming up with nothing, but I still had to get Nate to school, then myself to work. I checked the time on my phone again, and I noticed there was no reception there. That only added to the strangeness. When we left, I stopped in front of our building, and I looked up at our floor. It didn't even look as if another room would fit, but in all honesty, it was pretty hard to tell. It rolled around in the back of my mind all day at work. Should I tell someone? Who? The landlord? It wasn't going to be a fun conversation. When we took the place, it said 2 bedrooms, didn't it? Kenny was not the type of guy to miss charging for an extra room. Had he made a mistake? Had we both? And then how did Nate miss it too? I was doubting myself, I realized. I've been doing it for 20 years. Maybe someone snuck in and added another room. Okay, yeah, that was ridiculous. But really, though, what could I do? Where did it come from? Nate asked that night, leaning inside the doorway to the new room. I pulled him back and closed it, and then felt stupid for doing so. It was just an empty room. What was I pulling him back from? I don't know. We just must have missed it, I replied. Weird. Oh, he didn't look convinced. We were both tired from everything that's been happening lately. I began. Lots of stuff going on. I guess we just didn't notice. He looked from me to the door and then back. Really? He asked. Yes, Nathan. Really? As I watched him finish his meal that night, my mind drifted back to those news stories. That teacher from the top floor, the missing woman and her daughter. The sudden blare of a car horn and shouting from outside snapped me out of it. There was a smash of glass and the sounds of a scuffle. I went over and closed the window. I need to get Nate away from here, I thought. It was incredibly warm that night, the worst of the summer and oppressive heat and humidity. Even the usual noises of the city were dampened, like the energy was just sucked from the streets. I was drifting in and out of sleep. Nights like that always seemed darker, the silence heavier. Nate had fallen asleep quickly in his room. I was going to stay up, but the heat had drained me. A shaft of moonlight cutting across my bedroom was the only light, and then I heard a door slam shut. The shock of the sound ran through the apartment. I snapped awake and sat up in bed, heart racing, and I peered into the dark hallway. Silence. My bedroom door was still open. Always was in case Nate shouted for me. I slid out of bed and I put on the lights. There hadn't been another sound since the slam. I went to Nate's room and softly opened the door. There he was, still fast asleep, his blue dinosaur nightlight illuminating his bed. I looked around his room. What was I expecting to find? I hadn't imagined, had I? I went to the front door. It was locked and the chain was on, just like I'd left it. Maybe I'd been dreaming, but there was still one other door. I turned to the new room. I'd closed that, didn't I? The silence seemed to press me as I stood there. I grabbed the handle and I opened it. Nothing. It was dark and empty inside. I closed it tight, annoyed at my own nerves. A grown man afraid of a bump in the night. Stupid. It had been the wind, I thought. All the windows were open, weren't they? There wasn't much of a breeze, but still. That metallic, tinny smell was in the hall now, though I thought. Maybe I was imagining that too. I rechecked that every door was closed tight. I looked in every corner of every room again, and then I laid back in bed, wide awake. It took a few more hours of fighting the heat before I got back to sleep. The next day was Saturday, when Nathan stayed with the only family we still had, Natalie's parents. Sadly, they had never cared much for either of us. They aren't always nice to me, he said, sounding worried, as if he might get in trouble for saying it. I know, Nate, I know. I'm sorry. Okay, but we don't have anyone else. It's hard to explain, but we need to have somewhere you can go so I can work. And it's always good to have people you can be with. And I don't know, in case anything ever happens to me. Why would that happen? He said. Then I realized my mistake. I shouldn't have said that, I thought. It won't, son. It won't happen, okay? We just have to be careful. We got to be prepared. Just in case, can I just stay with you today? He said, grabbing my hand. No, you can't stay with me. Come on, Nathan, we talked about this. I'm sorry. I know it isn't much fun, but it's only for a day. Please, Dad, can't no means no, okay? I thought my voice was too harsh again. He looked like he was going to cry, but he held back, trying to hide the waver in his voice. Okay? Everything was hard now, I thought. No easy days, no easy decisions. The room kept edging its way into my mind as we were getting ready. Just another thing to worry about. Something kept drawing my eyes back to it. making me look. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, there was an urge to open the door again, to step inside. I glanced down the hallway. The door was lying open only an inch or so, but it was open. Nathan, did you open that door? He looked up from tying his shoelaces. You heard me. Did you open that door? No. He sounded scared just to answer me. I felt a rush of guilt. Was I really that bad to him? To scare him so much that he was afraid to answer a simple question? I didn't shout at him only once or twice when he did something seriously dangerous. He shouldn't ever be scared. Not me. Not in his own home. Okay, son, it's okay. All right, go finish getting ready, okay? I waited till he was out of sight before walking slowly down to the new door and looking inside. The room seemed bigger now. I stared. It was a different shape, too. I wasn't imagining this. There was an indent on the far wall. It was about a foot deep, and it hadn't been there before. It was like the beginnings of a new corridor. It was impossible. I stepped in, not believing what I was seeing. There was a sound now on the edge of my hearing, but I couldn't make it out. It was like an echo of a voice, a woman's voice. When I closed my eyes, it almost sounded like Natalie. No, I told myself. Just my imagination. Filling the silence with my own thoughts. The stress was making me paranoid. Dad? Huh? Oh, sorry, Nate. I got distracted. I took one last look around the beige walls. We got back late that night. Nate was falling asleep in my arms as I carried him upstairs. Despite everything that was going on, when I sat us both down on the couch, I started drifting off too. I don't know what woke me, but suddenly I was wide awake and alert, as if I'd never slept at all. In the hallway, I saw the door of the new room swing slowly open. There was no sound. I froze in place. A flickering shadow was cast into the hall, and then the light went out. I heard movement. Someone was in there. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't stressful. I know what I saw and what I heard. I glanced at Nate. He was still fast asleep. I got up as quietly as I could, slipping my shoes off to avoid making a sound. There was a kitchen knife lying out on the drying board. I picked it up, trying to keep my eyes on the door. The lights flickered again. I gripped the knife as I crept down the hallway. Someone was in there. I reached the doorway, an inch forward. I looked inside and there was no one there. No one. Only the room. But it had changed again. There was a new hallway now, at least 20 feet long, running out far beyond where the building would stop. It was impossible. I moved inside as the light clicked on and off, knife still in my hand. I saw a mark on the wall, a long, unbroken line, maybe 4 feet off the ground. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of that. I knelt down alongside the line. I ran my finger across the surface. It looked like a crayon. The tinny smell was in the air again. My eyes were pulled to the end of the corridor. It was like I was being watched. A voice on the edge of hearing the lights flickered off. There's something in there. I don't know how to explain it properly being inside that room. I was afraid. I'm not ashamed to admit it, but there was something more of an urge to keep. Moving forward to follow the corridor, I was pushed by invisible hands into the dark. I stepped forward. Dad. Oh my God, Nathan, you scared the hell out of me. I kept the knife out of sight as I turned, slipping it inside my shirt so we couldn't see it. Dad, you okay? I realized I was shaking. Were you in here, Nathan? Have you woken up since we came home? No, he said, sounding confused. Nate, this is important, okay? Tell me the truth. I am Dad. What's wrong? Nothing. Nothing, it's fine. You don't. I'm sorry. You didn't do anything wrong. Come here. I snatched him up in a hug and I carried him out. I tickled him until he started laughing. I went back as soon as he was in the living room and I closed the door. And then I pulled the chair out of the kitchen and I braced it against the handle. I checked to make sure the front door and windows were locked again. And then I checked every room, cupboard, and behind every door. I felt like I was cracking up, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep otherwise. Hey Nate, you want to sleep in the big bed tonight? We can watch a movie. I didn't want him out of my sight. Yeah, he cheered, running up for a hug. He fell asleep beside me, maybe a half hour later, still exhausted. But I lay there wide awake for what must have been half the night. Is this what it feels like to lose your grip on sanity? I thought when stress and anxiety become too much. Experiencing things, are impossible. I mean, it couldn't be real, could it? And then what did that mean? It couldn't all be in my mind if Nate had seen it too. We weren't both crazy. I mean, I've been in there, touched the walls. If I asked someone else to come in and look, and it was all in my head. I didn't know I should see a doctor. I told myself, stay calm, make an appointment in the morning, Nate too, just to be safe and get out of there. The familiar sounds of the city woke me in the morning. Traffic voices like any other day. I swung out of bed and left Nate sleeping. We were leaving today, I told myself right now. I dug our suitcases out and I started packing. I'd left the kitchen chair propped against the door of the room. I checked on Nate every few minutes, but he'd hardly moved. I was about halfway through when I realized some things were missing. Nate's football, a couple of my books. It didn't make any sense. I remembered unpacking them, and now he hadn't taken them out of the apartment. I'd almost given up searching for them when my eyes fell back on that door. No, I thought the chair was still tied under the handle. Nothing had moved, not a millimeter. I took a deep breath. I had to know one last look before we left this place forever. I slid the chair away and opened the door one last time. And there they were. The football, my books, some cans from the kitchen I hadn't even noticed were missing. The crayon marks were still on the walls, and there was a new door at the very end of the corridor. I began to panic. I tried not to. I tried, but this was too much. Someone was messing with me, or I had just lost my mind. Either way, it wasn't safe for my son. We had to get out now. Nathan, I said, and the door slammed shut behind me. I'm haunted by these moments. No matter how many times I go over them, no matter how much I pray, it never changes and it never hurts less. I wish I could go back and do it again. I had done everything wrong, everything. I wrenched the door open, and I ran to my bedroom for my son. But he was gone, and it all became a blur. Adrenaline, fear, confusion. I ran through the apartment, shouting his name over and over again, knocking over furniture. The front door was still locked, and the chain was still on. I saw the new door lying open, and I rushed back to it. He must be in there, I thought. Got past me somehow. It didn't make sense. Any of it. I can see that now. I charged through, and there was only another corridor, another door, all as empty as the ones before. Nathan. I ran forward, reckless, foolish. The next door opened with a push, and I was through again. Another corridor. A dozen more doors, one already a crack open. Nathan. I ran through it and heard another door slam close behind me. It's like trying to remember a nightmare. Disjointed images and sounds, the metallic smell, echoes rolling back through dark corridors. The flickering lights, her voice in my head, Natalie's voice. I saw more crayon marks on the walls, long lines leading through doorways, a series of giant stairwells plunging down into the gray below 1,000 other rooms. I was delirious, rambling. I remember my own voice coming out in a frenzied stream. I remember the crayon line stopping over a woman's dead body. There were toys beside her, a drawing book, and a stuffed bear. There were words on the walls I can't remember, and I ran on. There's that feeling of being watched now. Something there, just behind me. I was still running, but now I'm running from something, not just searching. Doors were slamming behind me, endless rooms and hallways ahead of me. I don't know how long I've been running. The lights flashed on and off. I heard a voice in the distance, different this time. And then I saw it. Nathan's football. I saw it lying on the floor through the next doorway. I stumbled forward and crashed through to the other side. The door slammed behind me. I was back in our apartment, in the hallway. But I was alone, and my son was gone. I turned to go back, and there was only a blank wall where the door had been. No sign that it had ever been there. No, my legs buckled under me. The world was spinning. My vision blurred, and then I was gone. It's been a year now since Nathan vanished. I woke up in the hospital the next day. I tried to get up as soon as I was conscious. To get away, get back to my apartment to find my son. They wouldn't let me leave, the police or the doctors. They thought I heard him, that I heard Nate. The other neighbor upstairs phoned the police, said he heard crashes and screaming coming from our apartment. When the police broke down the door, they found me unconscious in the hallway. There were months of questions, lawyers, and doctors, and I told them everything I could without sounding crazy. We were getting ready to move, and he disappeared. I panicked when I couldn't find him, and I passed out. I didn't know what else to tell him. I don't know where he is, I told him. I don't know where he is. I kept the apartment, kept everything as it was. I sleep in the hall, and I walk around the building at night. I listen to his voice. I see him every time I close my eyes. He might still be here somewhere. He must be. And I can't ever leave here if there's a chance, no matter how small. I tell myself I'll find him, that he's lost in those rooms like I was needing me. I tell myself I can get back to him. Maybe he'll find his own way out. He could do it. He was a clever boy. You know, clever. He could do it. But I have to get back there. He could be calling for me now, calling for me to help him. Every morning I wake up, I think this is the day. It will have all just been a dream. I'll run to his room and snatch him up out of his bed, and I'll tell him I love him. I'll hold him like I did when he was born, when he met my eyes and we were the only people in the world. I will find my son. I will find him. I never thought we'd be in danger. That was never a real conscious thought. After all our adventures to ghost houses, seances, or abandoned asylums, none of us had ever actually run into something dangerous. But a couple of years ago, that all changed. It was all because of something called the Forza crowd. Let me explain. In my early 20s, I fell in love with the dark corners of the internet. Video essays discussing various spooky threats and unexplained phenomenon of the rural Midwest. Clips showing seemingly impossible things done to ordinary people by mysterious creatures. Some which would be revealed as hoaxes, others that wouldn't. I've always had a particular love for local legends and rumors. There's something very real and raw about those special little whispers that exclusively travel by word of mouth. I found a couple of friends through this hobby, first of which is my buddy Paul. We've been friends ever since we dressed up as the same version of Penguin, the villain, at a Halloween party in our late teens. I thought our time exploring haunted houses would be over when he started to date this girl, Veronica, or more commonly known as Vera. My fears were unfounded, though, as she turned out to be just as weird as he is, making a great addition to our club of hobby horrors. This excursion started because Vera told us about this thing from her hometown, some left-of-nowhere kind of place in rural Minnesota. She said there was a local legend, but that there had been so many sightings that it was nothing short of a miracle that it hadn't been more widely covered. Polly and I were all ears. I can't believe you haven't heard of it. None of you know about the Forza crowd? She asked. Yeah, no, we hadn't. So it turns out this thing is a bit of a tall tale in her neck of the woods. The Forza crowd had been around for decades, and it was apparently so well known that most locals didn't even find it interesting anymore. Still, local law enforcement had an official warning out. And by warning, we mean a chain-link fence and an angry sign. So the year I turned 24, we all packed ourselves into Polly's car and set our sights towards rural Minnesota. If this thing was as prominent as we'd been told, there was no way we were going to miss it. It's not as stupid as it sounds. Polly and I had been on dozens of excursions to places people had sworn were horrifying and actually haunted. But up until that point, we hadn't seen anything but creepy paintings, a couple of weirdly colored sunflowers, and felt a sudden cold chill or two. The idea of something physical and tangible was laughable. Vera called up one of her local friends ahead of our arrival. This guy was sort of a tour guide specializing in what they call dark tourism. It's a thing, but it's often pretty grim stuff. Still, he seemed capable enough. He had a couple of YouTube videos that we checked out. He used to be easy to find back then. His YouTube channel bordered on about 200k subs. We packed for a sleepover. Snacks, tents, sleeping bags, a couple of cameras, the usual. Vera told us little to nothing about what to expect. She wanted Neil to get a chance to give us the complete tour. I don't want to spoil it, she chuckled as we drove past St. Cloud. It's a thing. It's a great thing. Come on, give us a hint, Polly begged. Like the name. What's that about? There's a crowd, but this is like Fort, Neil said. Oh, great. Real helpful, Polly sighed, taking a left turn back out on the highway. So we met our guide Neil on a cloudy afternoon in mid-May, with high summer right around the corner. The air was moist, and the ground was muddy. There was the first sprinkling of rain in the air, and we could hear rumbling from the east, bad weather drawn in from Lake Superior. Neil was this peppy 30-something man, khaki shorts, a small rucksack, a baseball cap, and a long-sleeved gray t-shirt. No hair, a trimmed beard, and a sunny disposition. The opposite of what I imagined a dark tourism tour guide to look like. Meanwhile, Vera looked like one of her parents worked at Hot Topic. Polly was hard to miss, too. Not even a turtleneck and camo pants could cover all his tattoos. We pulled into a parking lot near an old hiking trail. There was a broken gate protecting an overgrown RD. Neil's car, a sensibly priced sedan, was parked just a bit further down the road. He welcomed us and Vera sorted out the introductions. With that said and done, the tour was on. Neil immediately stopped us. Okay, the first stop is actually right here, Neil said, pointing at the ruined gate. The entrance to the Hatchet paper mill has been shut down since the 80s. Folks didn't take kindly to the whole Clean Water Act, Neil said. We're technically trespassing, chuckled Vera. Cool, by now local folks have known about this place for decades. While going inside is sort of frowned upon, nobody really cares, Neil continued. So this thing isn't that dangerous, then? I asked. Both yes and no, Neil chuckled. He usually stays away, but we might catch a glimpse. But yeah, it's not a big fan of people. As we put on our boots, Neil started telling us about what the hell we were to expect and why this might turn out to be very interesting. See, the Forza crowd is not a supernatural specter or alien visitor, according to locals. It is a very real creature. It had been around for decades, keeping to itself within the old paper mill. So yeah, most lawmen in these parts know about it, but there hasn't been any immediate need to deal with it. It's kept to itself, and the owners of the land aren't very government friendly, Neil explained. So what does it look like? What can we expect? I asked. Vera didn't tell you, Neil chuckled. Really? Yeah, really, I said. Polly turned to Vera, but she just grinned. Neil shrugged. Well, it looks like 4 people. Just 4 regular people. 2 taller people in the back, 2 shorter or crouching people in the front, like they're posing for a picture, Neil explained. It was about as stupid as it sounded. Suddenly, I could see why this wasn't a big thing to an outsider. This thing would just look like 4 people, even if I saw it with my own eyes. What was there to see? I couldn't help but to think that Neil probably had a couple of people ready to scare us a little. Okay, are you telling me we're trekking to some tetanus-covered shithole to watch 4 kids in Halloween masks stand at the end of a corridor? I whispered to Polly. Might be fun, Polly shrugged. Yeah, man, I'm not buying it, I replied. Being skeptical about the sudden reveal, Polly and I started asking a whole bunch of questions, like how it could just look like 4 people, and what it actually was, what it ate, where it lived, all kind of stuff. I admit we weren't very polite. Neil didn't seem to mind, though, and tried his best to keep up with us. It needs chlorine as part of its diet, Neil patiently explained. That's why it moved into the mill. There's an adjoining chlorine extractor, which they used to bleach the paper before the shutdown. There's still loads of stuff around. It's in the water, too, Neil continued. So it just eats old paper, I asked. No, it munches up white-tailed deer and rodents. Not birds, though. Damn thing loves birds, Neil explained. Vera was having trouble containing her glee. We were giving her the "Are you real?" look, and she couldn't stop grinning. Neil, on the other hand, seemed perfectly happy answering our questions. Okay, so how big is it? Got to be sizable if it eats deer, I said as we entered a clearing in the forest. Well, it's large enough to be mistaken for 4 people. It is a bit of a mimic, Neil explained. You said it tricks people. Tricks people into what? I asked. Well, either to look a little closer or scare them off. It depends, Neil said. And you've seen this, I said. Sure have, Neil nodded. We'll probably all see it off in the distance if we're lucky. It does move around a lot. Making our way out of the clearing, we got a clear view of the abandoned paper mill. 6 large buildings and a couple of chemical silos lining a dying river. All of it looked worse for wear. Most of the outside was decorated with elaborate graffiti and rust. There wasn't a single window that hadn't been vandalized. Still, Neil didn't skip a beat. As we made our way closer, he kept telling us interesting facts. You can kind of notice it by the sound of birdsong, he explained. The thing rolls around in sawdust as a sort of dust bath, and it gets a lot of parasites stuck. Birds love it, so they're usually close by, ready to pick up little maggots and parasites. Sort of like like a crocodile, Neil said. I'm listening to birdsong right now. Polly laughed. You think that's the forest? Or is it the Fives? Crowd? It's 4 people in a crowd. And no, that's just birds. They're usually red ones flocking to it. Making a sort of thrilling noise, Neil responded, giving him a cold look. Oh man, that's exciting, said Polly. Neil said nothing. We entered the mill through one of the truck entrances, stepping over a collapsed garage door. I could practically taste the mold and residual chemicals, but Neil swore that we'd be fine. He said it was just moisture, apparently. Vera wasn't convinced, it seemed. We made our way to the second floor, walking across a rusted-out catwalk with a loose railing. Beams of light made its way through holes in the roof, slowly fading from the overcast. Overlooking the mill, we could see this place wasn't just some empty building. It must have been abandoned in a hurry. There were still some expensive machines left on the floor, most of which had been rusted to the core by decades of neglect. It roams a lot, Neil explained as we slowly made our way forward. I don't think it nests until it finds a partner, and I can tell there aren't many of them around. How come? I asked. Well, I think they have no means of finding one another. Suggesting they might have once lived in colonies where you could just, like throw out an arm and grab a mate. There are a couple of holes around here where it's burrowed, suggesting it might be subterranean, he said. Really, I would love to see that. Really, I'd love to, Polly chuckled. Okay, shrugged Neil. Well, let's go see one. Neil guided us through the factory floor, down a corridor, through a ransacked lunchroom, and out the back near one of the silos. There was a massive room containing vast piles of sawdust, easily the largest pile I'd ever seen. Polly's instinct was to try and climb it, but Neil recommended against it. No, that thing is crawling with parasites. I wouldn't touch it. And you see that indent there on the left flank? That's where it's been, Neil explained. That just looks like a dent to me, Polly said. Vera elbowed him, and Polly made a lip-zipping motion. Neil did his best not to roll his eyes. Neil continued to explain the many findings of the locals over the years. For example, the Forza crowd had a larger body than one might think. But it hides it behind the crowd of 4, much like an insect shielding its body. He claimed they had a sketchy view of this back part from a side photo taken in the late 90s. Of course, it was blurry at best. You could barely tell there were people in the picture at all. There had also been a steep decline of white-tailed deer in the area, while many claimed this was due to illegal hunting. Neil argued that it coincided with the growth of the creature in the early 90s. This was a returning pattern with the Forza crowd. Everything about it could be explained by the most mundane things. It just looked like people at a distance. Its main food source was abundant. There was nothing immediate and apparent about it. The Forza crowd could just as well be nothing. Maybe that's why we'd never heard about it. Neil continued the tour, showing us the various buildings around the complex. He told us about the different stations in the early history of the strange creature rumored to live there. We were shown a couple more points of interest, mostly relating to the early history of the creature and, by extent, the community at large, for example. There had been a few people that had gone missing around the mill, but that was attributed to failing safety standards. Again, it was unclear. It could be blamed on a large, monstrous beast, but the far more likely cause was just an accident. Occam's razor. As we reached the rear exit, Neil clapped his hands together. This is where I usually spot it. It moves through the old chemical storage right over there. Neil said, "So what do we do?" I asked, "Do we lure it out?" "Well, I suggest we wait." Neil smiled. "Put your feet up. Take in the signs. It's a really cool place." Polly walked over to me, carefully elbowing me for attention. Leaning in, he whispered, "The kids he hired to scare us aren't here yet. Still, it was nice to just be out with friends for a change. Break up the monotony of work." We put up our tents. We had a couple of hot dogs. Vera took a nap listening to her favorite podcast. Polly went for a jog on the catwalk, making little dust particles rain on the factory floor. It echoed through the entire building. I got a chance to sit down with Neil for a bit. Just the two of us. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, but I could tell he was putting on a show. Then again, that was kind of his job. Vera had known him since high school, so he'd given her a good price for this. In a quiet moment, I asked him, "So what's the deal, man? Why is this so interesting?" I asked, "It's a funny thing. It's right there for all to see. And everything about it just looks like a hole punch in nothing." Neil smiled. "Oh, come on, man. I mean, it's a great story. You've put a hell of a lot of thought into it. And look, I appreciate that. Most places, they just say it's like a ghost or an alien," I said. Look, he nodded, raising his hot dog from the open fire. "I'm not bullshitting you. This thing is real." I looked at him for a moment. I could tell there was no hesitation behind those eyes. Either this man was a born liar, or he actually believed this thing. For the next couple of hours, the sky grew darker. The rain passed us by, but not without scattering a few drops our way. The overcast drowned the rusty walls in black, making the shadows from our campfire long and alien. Spending the night there was impressive in and of itself. The uneasy sounds of groaning metal, combined with a Minnesota wild slipping in through the cracks in the building veneer. We set up our tents on the outskirts of the old administration building. No risk of setting fire to anything. We could tell it was frequented by a lot of rebellious teenagers. The graffiti spoke for itself. Neil assured us that the Forza crowd didn't mind people and that it would keep its distance. In his experience, it wasn't interested in hunting people. Polly just rolled his eyes. The charade was going strong. I had a surprisingly restful sleep, nodding off the moment my head hit the pillow. I didn't get to sleep for long, however. A few minutes to midnight, I heard a rustling noise coming from Polly and Vera's tent. After I heard the tent open, I peeked out. I was a bit embarrassed to see the two of them sneak out with a roll of toilet paper, obviously going off to mind their own business. I lay back down to sleep when after a couple minutes, there was a whisper outside my tent. Peeking out again, I could see Vera and Polly now looking a bit more awake. "Holy shit," Polly smiled. "They're here. You gotta see this, man." I looked over at Neil's tent. The man was fast asleep. Had he planned this in advance? How did he know we'd be skulking around at night, grabbing our flashlights? A camera and putting on some proper boots, the three of us left to get a better look. Leaving Neil behind in his tent right around the corner, Vera whispered, "They're just standing there." There was a hole in the wall leading to the outside. Polly went first, then Vera. The moment I stepped outside, I was hit by an immediate chill. Maybe the storm was turning back. Slowly raising their flashlights eastward, it came into view for the first time. The Forza crowd. 4 people standing out in the middle of the night. A man, a woman, and 2 younger men in their late teens. A family, seemingly all stood huddled up together, wearing identical white shirts and navy blue pants. They all had the same hair color, just different lengths. The parents stood shoulder to shoulder, while the younger ones stood about a step ahead and with a bit of space between them. I couldn't help but to stare. Vera took a picture with her digital camera, making sure the flash was off. It was eerie. Even Polly could feel it, even if he'd never admit it. "That's messed up," he whispered. "Why they come so late?" Maybe he heard us sneak out, Vera whispered back. Either way, this is insane, right? I wasn't so sure. The way Neil spoke about it seemed a bit too honest to be so simple. As Polly kept his flashlight fixed on them, they slowly began to move with arms firmly at their sides. The four of them slowly stepped sideways. It was eerily coordinated, moving in a sort of diagonal tandem, almost like they were gliding. We followed them a bit just to see what they were doing. They were walking backwards towards one of the chemical silos, always keeping their eyes firmly fixed on us. As they got further away, they seemed to speed up. Vera barely got a chance to say hold on before they hurried inside the silo, still maintaining that perfect cohesion. As they disappeared, I could even hear Polly sigh with relief. That was freaky, he said. Turning back towards our makeshift camp, we rounded the corner, only to suddenly stop. There were more people. Another group of four, these a lot smaller children, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Two who were a little taller and two a little bit smaller, all with their arms straight and their feet moving in that same strange diagonal tandem. Before we got a chance to speak, they made a strange whistling noise and disappeared into a crack in the wall. This wasn't part of the plan. I never agreed to have kids roam around a place like this. It was dangerous. Whether this was Neil's idea or someone else's, this was just a bad idea. All right, that's enough. We gotta wake him up now, I said. Then again, something in the back of my mind was telling me that this was too strange to just be a couple of stray kids. The rational part of me insisted that this was nothing more than a spook or a misunderstanding. But another part of me was starting to wonder what the hell I'd stepped into. Whispering for Neil to wake up, we could hear him murmuring to himself. He looked out of his tent with a wide yawn. They're here now, Vera said. But the kids are a little much. Neil just blinked, looking back and forth between us. What kids? He asked. Vera told him what we'd seen outside. It didn't seem to give Neil any pause until she clarified the group of kids that hurried inside. Neil just sat there, putting his clothes on with a furrowed brow. If he'd been playing the act of a tour guide up until now, this was the point where something changed. He asked her to clarify several things. Their height, their speed, their reaction, their sounds. Polly didn't seem to know what to think about this, flip-flopping between diehard skepticism and genuine concern. I was somewhere in between. Well, started Neil. It's been rumored that the Forza crowd is a sort of arachnid. It might be part of genetics. Wait, what? What kind of genetics? I asked. Part of genetics. He clarified. Able to effectively breed without a mate, Neil explained. What would that even mean? Polly asked. Neil paused for a moment, then sprang into action. It means we have to leave. It's nesting, he said. As we hurried to bring down our tents and pack up our things, I noticed something overhead in and out of the holes in the roof. Little red birds fluttered about a dozen of them. Thinking back on what Neil had said earlier, I was sure he'd mentioned something about birds. I tapped him on the shoulder, pointing upwards, and his face went pale as he held up a finger to his lips. Vera and Polly noticed, and we all fell silent, moving very slowly so as to not make noise. Every now and then the birds would land, making little chirping noises, and then return upwards. Vera pointed at something, and there it was. It slowly sidestepped into view, only the legs of the four people moving, their arms remaining straight. Their heads wobbled a little as it moved. Looking more like bobbleheads than people, they still looked like they were floating forward, held up by some unseen force. But most worrying of all, they were coming towards us. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run. Another part wanted to stand there and fully believe that this was somehow all bullshit. It had to be. There's no such thing as monsters. I've checked. Over all the years of laughing at the dark, I learned that there really was no such thing as monsters. But as these four strange people crept closer, I wasn't so sure anymore. And Neil seemed just as, if not more, confused. Nobody moves, he whispered. Let's see what it is. And then, out of little cracks and nooks, I could see more faces. The four children, for one, but another set of 4 further down. They didn't look at all like children, more like miniature adults, all moving in that same strange pattern, alternating their steps among each other. These just, I don't know, they didn't look finished. Hair growing out of their eyes, one leg too short, another too long. A drooping mouth that wouldn't stop twitching. Two of them were conjoined at the shoulder, making an awful gurgling noise. I counted 6 groups in total, and some of those groups weren't people. They couldn't be. That's not what people look like. The largest one, as it got closer, it was bigger than I'd expected. Easily 7 feet tall. Still, they all looked at us with those glassy-eyed nothings. They didn't really have eyes. It was more like white globes with accidental spots. One of the red birds gently landed on the shoulder of the tall creature, gently pecking at its neck. They didn't even flinch. Polly held Vera tight as we all slowly backed off, leaving what little we'd brought behind. The campfire had long since burned out, but the tall one still daintily stepped over the embers. It did so in a strange manner, having one of the front people lift its legs straight out, seemingly levitating in the air. But that's when the illusion broke. As it got closer, it seemed to let go of its mimicry. One of the 2 front people split in half, revealing a set of arachnid legs with the same color as their hair. Impossibly tall and thick legs, hiding an all-black creature with dark, beady eyes. They'd been there all along. Folding into vertical rows, acting as the back row shirt buttons, they unfolded like origami, wordlessly tearing themselves apart, breaking whatever image I had of it, revealing a creature stretching out to its full size, easily breaking 9 feet tall with arms in every direction. Every leg was camouflaged as half a person that, when put together, would form the illusion of a group of 4. Fake bodies, nothing more than membrane and skin writhed back and forth lifelessly. Morbid appendages. I barely even heard the others screaming. Polly grabbed Vera, heading for one of the side exits. Neil just kept repeating, "No, no, no," over and over, not even running. And I was frozen, staring into the slight reflection of 8 eyes, arranged in 2 perfect columns of 4. White-clothed arms had unfolded into mandibles, creeping closer. At that moment, I thought I was going to die. I wasn't accepting that this was actually happening. 100 thoughts were running through my mind at once, painting all the strange possibilities that might explain this. Prank show? Bad dream? Something. Anything. I could have died that day. Suddenly, it turned away from me. Polly had run a hot dog stick straight through its right front leg. Looking back at this, it was all so fast. Using 2 of its legs, the Forza crowd hurled him straight across the room and up 1 level, slamming into the upstairs catwalk railing. Polly wasn't moving. Vera was panicking, doubling back to get to him. Neil grabbed her, heading for the side exit. I could have tried going with him, but there was no way I'd get by that angered creature. Instead, we had to split up, force it to pick a lane, and of course, it went after me. I went straight ahead in the wrong direction, down a long corridor, my steps pounding the dusty concrete. A dozen little feet followed me. Even their steps sounded human. It was like they were wearing shoes. The large one contracted, crawling forward with its 4 front legs first, furiously tapping its way forward. It was so fast, so twitchy, like it had abandoned all attempts at mimicry. I managed to make my way up the catwalk. The moment I reached the top, the stairs collapsed behind me, deafening me with a flood of metal crashes to the floor. The creature couldn't make its way up these old walkways. There was too much concentrated weight, but that didn't stop it. Moments later, the tips of its arms would wrap around the catwalk as it hung upside down beneath, trying to bite through the metal. And while I was fast, it could easily keep my pace. I could feel the mandibles poking through the steel, scraping against the bottom of my boots. Its arms reached for me, tearing at my jacket with little claws at the end. A section of railing gave out, unbalancing the creature and nearly knocking me to the floor below. Instead, it lost its grip and fell. It'd just be a few seconds before it got back up again. I realized then this was a creature hungry to feed its young. This was not a docile attraction. Not anymore. There was a short platform connecting the 2 of the buildings. The thing at once looked like a sort of glass tube, but now was just a set of unstable open-air platforms. Still, I didn't have much choice. I went for it. I couldn't think straight anyway. I have these brief memories of the chase. It felt like hours, even though it was probably just minutes. In my mind, I can picture every corner, every bump, and every skip, but it's hard to put into words. It was just this long, wiry passage weaving together into one singular, adrenaline-rushed madness with that thing close behind me. Reaching the other end of the platform, I could see the Forza crowd retreating into the dark. It was clever. It knew that the platform couldn't support its weight and that the fall would hurt. I ended up the way I came on the same walkway as Polly, overlooking our previous campsite. Running up to him, I could tell he was breathing, but badly concussed. His one eye was blood-filled and swollen, and his left arm was bent the wrong way. There was no way I'd get him to walk out of there anytime soon. I considered my options. I could leave him. I could run. I could try to pick him up and pull him along, but none of it was plausible, especially not leaving him. Instead, I propped us up against the wall. Somehow he was still conscious, if barely. Together we sat there, listening to the red birds fluttering in and out of the broken roof. Turns out the Forza crowd couldn't reach us, couldn't use the adjoining platforms, and there were no remaining stairs. Instead, it stood beneath us, desperately reaching upwards. In a sort of fear-induced bravado, I stood up to look down at it. The catwalk groaned, but held firm. For a moment, our eyes met. This button-eyed creature, completely emotionless. A creature that understood nothing but meat and offspring. It still reached for me, carefully, even tenderly, as if asking me to be a friend to surrender. I sat back down next to Polly. He panted heavily. I think his ribs were broken. I'm gonna get a new tattoo, he blurted out. Please don't, I muttered back. As he pointed at the thing, the arachnid legs slowly came back down, and little by little, the creature retreated into the compound, its young scuttling back and forth between its legs. And from a distance, even then, it was still hard not to see it as just a group of 4 people just standing around in the dark. The 2 of us stayed up there, nodding in and out of exhaustion. I tried to keep Polly stable, frantically looking up at the sky, waiting for the overcast to drift away. The morning had to come at some point. Polly and I spent hours up there, waiting for Vera and Neil to come back. They eventually did, bringing a couple of cops with him. They managed to help Polly back down and to tend to his wounds. He would end up losing the eye in surgery, but would otherwise make a full recovery. He actually got a tattoo of a spider later on. We've talked a lot about uploading our pictures and videos, but even now, looking back at what little footage we have, it just looks like people standing around in the dark. There's no attack or monstrous transformation. It doesn't look like anything. Just people. Strange people. But people nonetheless. Neil talked to the cops about reinforcing the fence. As he suspected, the Forza crowd had gone through a sort of self-fertilization, reproducing without a mate. We'd done the equivalent of standing between an angry mother bear and her cubs. But then again, we lived to tell the tale. They didn't do much to prevent this from happening again. They fixed part of the fence and they put up a new sign. I think the owners also came in to make some kind of statement, but I don't know about all that. It's been a few years since then. I tried my best to find a good time to talk about it, but I just never got it right. It was too important to just blurt out and too difficult to think about. Neil has taken down his YouTube channel and removed his videos, not wanting to get any more people to come look for the Forza crowd. In fact, a lot of it has been scrubbed from the internet. Even the Wikipedia page, I think. I think he works with some kind of riverboat rentals out east now. In a couple of months, Vera and Polly are getting married. I think it's time we all put this behind us and we look to the future. As his best man, that's all I can do, really. Because even if there are monsters waiting outside, we can choose where we spend our nights. I choose to spend it here, far away, where the fire burns bright, far from the Forza crowd.